Chapter 595. Luckily, it was just a false alarm. Although Yang Yi and Murphy were looking forward to Earbook's arrival, it would not be good news for the child's health if he really came early. The next day, Yang Yi sent his daughter, who was still in a daze, directly from the hospital to kindergarten. Actually, Yang Yi slept the least and gave the bed to Murphy and Shi. He even had to suffer from the cold outside. Luckily, Yang Yi's physique was not bad. After a night of torment, he was still fine. On the other hand, Shi woke up very late in the morning. Actually, she only slept less than an hour in the middle, but she also woke up very late. In the end, when her father combed her hair, the young lady was still like a chick pecking at rice. Her head sank, and the upper half of her body fell on the bed again. He did not know if it was on purpose or if she was really sleepy, but anyway, the young lady giggled when Yang Yi tickled her. When they reached the kindergarten, Shi was still sticking to her father. Usually at this time, she could not wait to run upstairs to find her friends. Yang Yi squatted down and kissed his daughter's face as he said gently, "Go and play with your friends. Daddy will come and pick you up after school in the afternoon." Teacher Mu came up and held Shishi's little hand. Shi did not cry and obediently followed Teacher Mu. She even blinked her big eyes and said goodbye to her father. Before leaving, Yang even told Teacher Mu why Shi was listless. However, what he did not know was that Shishi's sleepiness was actually an illusion. The young lady had already slept enough. It was just that her brain gave the wrong signal. When they went upstairs and saw Lan Xian and the rest, Shi gradually became lively again. Amidst the chatter of her friends, Shishi's little head also became clear. She regained her usual smile and could not wait to tell everyone about her adventure last night. "My mom was going to give birth last night. But she didn't. Papa and I will send Mom to the hospital." At this point, Shi even puffed out her chest happily, feeling as if she had contributed her strength. "Wow, Shi, you also have a younger brother and sister?" Chen Shiryan asked in surprise. "Then he is also my younger brother's younger brother and sister." No. Shi giggled, waved her hand and explained. "Brother and sister are not out yet. Mom didn't give birth to a baby. Papa said the doctor didn't. The doctor said Mom didn't give birth to a baby." This logic was a bit confusing. Not only was Lan Xian confused, but Lu Weishao was also not fluent in Chinese, so she was even more confused. "Shi, your mother, your..." Lu Weishao paused for a while, not knowing how to express herself. Finally she said, "Is she sick?" Shi had to explain to Lu Weishao again, which would take a lot of time. But after the girl woke up, she was full of energy and was very enthusiastic to explain. She even used some Swedish to explain to her friends. On the other hand, after Yang Yi sent Shi to kindergarten, he was about to leave when he bumped into David, who was sending Lu Weishao over. The two of them chatted for a while, and Yang Yi also took the opportunity to practice his spoken Swedish. If he wanted to speak a foreign language properly, he would have to talk to foreigners and learn the accent of the other party. "David, I think you are not qualified to be a senior executive. How can there be such a free executive? How can you have time to send your daughter to school?" Yang Yi smiled and said to David in Swedish. "In China, that is indeed impossible. But in Sweden, it is a very normal thing." David did not mind and calmly told Yang Yi that there were stay-at-home dads everywhere in Sweden. Furthermore, he also told him that in Sweden, after giving birth, the father could apply for a year's leave to take care of the child. This system was simply. However, David wasn't a particularly qualified stay-at-home dad. He was ashamed to tell Yang Yi that he really didn't know how to make lunch. It was thanks to Yang Yi's daughters sharing that Lu Weishao didn't go hungry. The situation has improved. Although Linda has her own job, she is an artist, and she has her own art exhibition in China. But with her cooking, the house is well organized. David breathed a sigh of relief and smiled at Yang Yi. "That's a good thing. There is a good division of labor in the family." Yang Yi nodded. "Yes, that's right." David spread his hands and shook his beard. He said proudly, "Now I have time to find the coffee I want to drink." "What coffee do you want to drink?" Speaking of this, David sighed and complained to Yang Yi about the irregularities in the coffee shops in Rivertown. Especially in Tingshan district, many of the coffee shops sold instant coffee, Even if they found a few that sold freshly ground coffee, their coffee beans are not good. I have invited them to let me smell it. It has a moldy smell. You know that this is impossible in Sweden. David sighed. It was normal. After all, foreigners loved coffee, especially in Northern Europe. Yang Yi had stayed there in his previous life and knew that there were more coffee shops than restaurants in China. Even if it was not a big city, there would be a coffee shop in a small town. Of course, it was normal in China. Everyone had different interests and hobbies. Most people liked tea, and only a small number of people drank coffee. But they did not drink it like water like foreigners. So it was normal for there to be few coffee shops. I know fika. Yang Yi shouted to David with a smile. Fika was like tea in China or afternoon tea in England. Of course, the tea here was replaced with coffee. There might be some desserts like cinnamon rolls and berry pies, but the main theme was still coffee. However, the concept of fika was more casual. There was no fixed time. It was a kind of daily life that combined life enjoyment and social needs. Hearing Yang Yi's words, David nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, but I haven't been able to enjoy a good fika since I came to China. Although my secretary can make coffee for me, the best fika should be at the coffee shop. You know that, right?" Yang Yi nodded. He smiled and said, "In fact, my coffee shop has very good freshly ground coffee. If you really can't find anything you like, you can come to my coffee shop and try it." "Really? I thought I was going to the coastal area for coffee. My friend told me that there are more coffee shops like this in the coastal area, but it's too far away." David was a little surprised and said doubtfully, "The coffee shop at the corner welcomes you." Yang Yi smiled confidently. Back at the kindergarten, Shishi and her friends learned and played with the teachers as usual. It was noon again, lunchtime. This was the most anticipated moment for the children, especially Lon Xian and the others. Because the lunchbox Shishi brought was like the bag on the belly of a certain big-faced blue cat. There were different surprises every day. "I think there will be prawns today. I especially like the prawns made by Shishi's papa. It's super delicious," Lon Xian said longingly. "Prawns, I want to eat them." Lu Weisha followed Lon Xian and said expectantly. One of them was tall and the other was fat. It was quite funny when they walked together. In the end, Lu Weisha's mama's Western food didn't change much. After a few days, the little ones didn't have much interest in it, so they looked at Shishi's lunch box again. "I like to eat fish." It was Nan Jiayu's voice. "I like to eat chicken wings," Yang Luoqi said weakly. "I like everything you say." Chen Shiyun waved her hand boldly and said proudly, "So I like to eat all of them. Shishi's papa makes delicious food. I like to eat all of them too." This suddenly led everyone's topic. However, Shishi was very happy to walk hand in hand with her friends to the cafeteria. However, as she walked, she felt something in her head. The little girl stood there in a daze. "Ayo, Shishi, I almost bumped into you." Yang Luoqi staggered and hugged Shishi. "Chichi, my papa didn't give me lunch." The little girl helplessly held her friend's arm and said to her in a panic. "Ah." Several friends were dumbfounded. Chapter 596. That's right. Dad didn't make lunch for Shishi this morning. The little girl remembered. She woke up late at the hospital this morning. She was still in a daze and acted like a spoiled child with her father. She even ate the soy milk and steamed buns for breakfast in the ward. Then her father helped her change her clothes and went directly to the kindergarten. Shishi remembered correctly. She didn't bring her school bag, let alone a lunchbox. But what about my lunch? How could Papa forget? The little girl thought in a panic. At this moment, she felt as if she had been thrown into a dry well, alone and without anyone to rely on. Shishi didn't bring lunch? Well, the prawns are gone. Lon Xian lowered her little head in annoyance, as if she was the most disappointed one. Although the other friends didn't say anything, they felt the same way. They didn't think too much about it, and their disappointment showed on their faces. Only Lu Weisha, who didn't understand, was still confused. She asked Shishi, "Shishi, what did you say? You mean haven't you eaten?" "It's not that she didn't eat. She didn't eat," Chen Shiyun explained loudly. She didn't have lunch. Young Luoqi also explained to Lu Weisha. Now everyone understood. The little girl looked helpless. She looked at her friends and asked in a panic, "What should we do? If you don't have lunch, you will starve." Nan Zhaoyu thought that her friend didn't understand the seriousness of the matter. She explained seriously, "My mom didn't cook for us once, so my dad and I went to a restaurant." Young Luoqi saw that her friend's sky was about to fall. She suddenly understood. "Shishi, do you want me to eat with you? My mom made lunch, and there are delicious radishes." Young Luoqi held Shishi's hand and said with concern. Lan Xian shook her head and muttered, "Radishes are not delicious. I'm not giving it to you. Shishi doesn't have lunch. I want to share it with her." Young Luoqi pouted her mouth and said, "Her mother's cooking was said to be bad." "Is it really possible?" Sisi asked in surprise. Yes. Young Luoqi nodded vigorously. But at this time, the other children's minds also came around. "I also want to share with Shishi. Shishi, my mother made a big drumstick, but it's not as good as your father's. Let's share, okay?" Chun Shiryun shouted. "I have scrambled eggs with tomatoes. It's my favorite." Nan Zhaoyu chimed in. "I want to share some with Shishi too." Lan Xian was a little reluctant at first, but at this moment, the little girl who was bursting with a sense of responsibility also puffed out her chest and shouted, "Mine is the best. Grandma Wu made a lot of delicious food, fish and rice. I can't finish it. I also want to share some with Shishi." Lu Weisha didn't completely understand, but she understood sharing. The tall blonde girl excitedly raised her hand and said, Mine, share, Shishi has lunch." Just now, she felt like she had fallen into a deep well. At this time, Shishi seemed to see a group of friends who were actively trying to pull her up. Looking at this group of enthusiastic friends, the little girl was so moved that she almost cried. Now they were preparing to line up outside to enter the dining hall. The bleak and cold wind outside messed up the children's hair, and also made Cece's tender little face cold. However, at this moment, the little girl's heart was unprecedentedly warm. "I have lunch." Shishi was a little excited, and her eyes were red. She pulled young Luoqi and Lan Xian's hands and said, "You guys are so good. We all have to share." Nan Zhaoyu knew a lot of things. He waved his hand and summed it up like an old man. At this time, Teacher Shen, who was in charge of commanding and leading the team, came over and saw Shishi and the others gathered in a group. Usually these little girls, including a little boy, were very obedient. What was the situation today? "What's wrong with you guys?" Teacher Shen asked with a smile. Suddenly, as if a drop of water had dripped into a pot of oil, the children all shouted at the same time. Everyone was trying their best to explain for Shishi. Among them, Lan Xian's loud voice reflected her skill at this moment. Amidst the noise, her voice was particularly clear. Shishi's father didn't make lunch for her, and then Shishi didn't have lunch. We have to share it with Shishi. And then Shishi will have lunch. This and then that and then. Teacher Shin was almost confused by Lan Xian's words. However, she had also come here for this matter. Thus, she looked at the enthusiastic little girls in amusement and said, "Ayo, why are you all so cute? You're too kind. However, you don't have to worry too much about Yangshi's matter, and you don't have to contribute your own food." Teacher Shen's imagination was running wild. At this moment, what appeared in his mind was these little girls. Well, there was also a little boy. They were wearing patched cotton padded jackets and green military uniforms. They were hiding in a cold and gloomy tunnel. Outside the tunnel, squads of Japanese soldiers were searching for them with bayonets. Then they broke off the last piece of pancake and carefully passed it to each other. Pitifully, they even separated the crumbs and ate them. They did not despair and encouraged each other. Their beautiful eyes were burning with the light of hope for their motherland. Of course, when Teacher Shen came back to his senses, he saw a few pairs of black eyes and a pair of blue eyes looking at her with confusion. What did that mean? Yangshi actually. Teacher Shen patted Shishi's shoulder lovingly and pointed in the direction of the door. He smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about not having lunch because your father didn't forget to prepare lunch for you. Look, he brought it over for you." The little girl followed Teacher Shen's finger, and looked at the entrance of the kindergarten. The tall Yang Yi was standing beside the guard, carrying a big black bag. Was it really Dad? She still couldn't believe her eyes. She blinked in a daze. But when her father waved at her, she realized that she wasn't dreaming. Dad didn't forget me. She suddenly felt as if she had returned to heaven from hell. Her father's kind smile made her pick up hope again. Papa! The little girl seemed to run over happily, but the moment she threw herself into her father's arms, the disappointment, confusion, and helplessness that she had suffered just now seemed to have turned over. She couldn't help but lie on her father's shoulder and cry. Warm tears streaked across her icy little face. The little girl's big eyes contained a little grievance that seemed to change the color of the world. Okay, don't cry, don't cry. Yang Yi coaxed his daughter with heartache. Are you still sleepy? He was still in the state of shishi in the morning. Actually, Yang Yi didn't forget to prepare lunch for his daughter. How could he forget? It was just that he didn't even go home after sending her to kindergarten in the morning. How could he have the time to prepare? In the morning, after he took Murphy to the hospital for a checkup, he went home and then made lunch without stopping. As soon as he finished making lunch, Yang Yi sent it over. Of course, Yang Yi still came on time. Since he personally came to deliver lunch to his daughter, he didn't need to let Shishi eat reheated food. He simply came on time. The weather was a little cold, so he could let Shishi drink a mouthful of hot soup. If Yang Yi had really forgotten something, it was indeed something. He forgot to tell Shishi about this in the morning. Until now, he still hadn't remembered that he didn't tell his daughter. Don't worry, Dad will bring you lunch. However, Shishi wasn't angry with her father at this time. After her little grievance, she was full of joy. Because her father didn't let her down. Her father still cared about her. She had lunch to eat. Her father would always be her most reliable support. The little girl's tears turned into smiles. While shaking her little head, she hugged her father's neck and said in her sweet little nasal voice, "Papa, I love you." Yang Yi's heart was about to melt. He wiped the little girl's tears, kissed her little face, and said lovingly, "Dad loves you too." Chapter 597. Fu Jun invited Yang Yi and Lance Haokai, the two shareholders, to the headquarters of the Sahara Online Mall in Yangcheng. They would celebrate Singles Day with him and other executives, waiting for the sales data to come out. But in the end they couldn't go. Lance Haokai couldn't leave because of his real estate company, and Yang Yi had to take care of his wife and children. Especially when Murphy suddenly had a stomachache in the middle of the night. Yang Yi was even more worried. If he wasn't by her side, who else could Murphy rely on? Moreover, when Shishi came back that day, she didn't have any emotions at all. She happily told her mother the story of how she thought she wouldn't have lunch in kindergarten, but in the end, her father appeared out of nowhere. Hearing his daughter's story, Yang Yi had one more reason not to go. If he wasn't at home, who would make lunch for Shishi? Of course, he couldn't leave old Fu out. Yang Yi began to set up some monitors, cameras, and other equipment in the study at home 2 days in advance. He was going to turn the study into a remote conference room, which would be connected to the conference room of the Sahara Online Mall. Lance Haokai also came over, and the two of them had a remote meeting with Fu Jun and the others. When the computer was being installed, Shishi brought the little ones over to join in the fun. The little girl curiously watched her father take the computer out of the big cardboard box, then took off the white foam and stuffed it back into the box. "Papa, what is this?" Shishi put her two little hands on the table, looked up at her father's movements, and asked, "The computer. Yang Yi answered as he unscrewed the screws of the computer case. "But isn't the computer this big? Why is it so big?" The little girl gestured and said in confusion. Yang Yi looked sideways at his daughter and smiled. "That's a laptop, of course it's not big. This is a desktop computer, and its various parts have to be separated. Look, this is the computer, this is the display, and this is the speaker." Although Yang Yi knew that his daughter might not be able to understand or even listen to what he was saying, he still explained patiently. As he spoke, Yang Yi's actions did not slow down. He began to add RAM, replace the CPU, graphics card, and so on. Although it seemed like he would only use it once, Yang Yi planned to raise the security level of the villa while he was at it. In the future, he would install some cameras, infrared sensors, pressure alarms, and other equipment around the villa. Therefore, the performance of the host computer must be guaranteed. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, Yang Yi wanted to ensure the safety of his family. As expected, Shishi wasn't interested in these things. She blinked her big eyes as she watched her father fiddle with the intricate equipment. After a while, she couldn't help but look away. She turned her head to look at Baozi and Xiao Guai, who were making a commotion. Xiao Guai found something fun. One of the boxes that contained the display screens was lying on the ground, and it was facing Xiao Guai. This box was actually not small, but the opening was a little narrow. After all, it was an LCD screen. This narrow opening didn't seem to be suitable for Xiao Guai's thick and fat body. In Yang Yi's house, the 3 British short-hair cats were well taken care of. Not only did Yang Yi cook good food for them every day, but Murphy also often bought imported cat food and small dried fish for them from the Sahara Online Mall. As a result, the 3 kittens ate until they were fat, and their fur was shiny and smooth. Of course, they weren't fat otakus. They could still jump and play all day long. They could climb trees, walls, and anything else. They could only be said to be strong. However, Xiao Guai was still very interested in the box that didn't fit its body size. Xiao Guai stretched out its paws to explore, and then its big head began to push against the opening to squeeze in. At first, the box was pushed back by Xiao Guai, as if Xiao Guai's big face couldn't fit in. However, Xiao Guai didn't want to give up at all. As it pushed against the box, it twisted its big fat butt left and right, rushing forward. Finally, the box hit the bookcase at the back and stopped. Half of Xiao Guai's big face was stuffed in as well. The scene that followed was a perfect example of what it meant to be fat. Xiao Guai twisted its body and slowly squeezed its body into the box. Although the box was pushed open a little, Xiao Guai slowly squeezed its body into the box. Then its feet, its tail, and it even flipped its body inside. The display box was narrow, but it wasn't small. Therefore, little Guai was like a fish in water inside. It even stretched out its paws comfortably and squinted its eyes in happiness. Shishi watched with great interest and didn't even blink. However, after Xiao Guai squeezed in, Steamed Bun anxiously circled around the box, as if its good friend had fallen into a trap. It ran around the box worriedly. Steamed Bun had completely surpassed the 3 British short-hair cats in terms of size, but in terms of mentality, Steamed Bun was still very childish and still played with Xiao Guai and the others. At this moment, Steamed Bun thought that Xiao Guai was in danger, so it decided to lie down and look inside. However, how could a dog be allowed to get involved in this private cat territory? A fat cat's paw came out of the black box like lightning and slapped Steamed Bun's nose. This scene was very common. Whether it was when Steamed Bun first came to the house, or when it grew up and shamelessly followed Xiao Guai around, it had always been slapped by Xiao Guai. Luckily, Xiao Guai didn't show its sharp claws, so Steamed Bun just whimpered and retracted its head in pain. After a while, it wagged its tail habitually and looked in confusion at the strange box that had a cat's paw. Hee hee papa, look, Xiao Guai ran into the box. It's so big, and it can be inside. Then it won't let Steamed Bun play with it. Shishi looked at the scene happily, and didn't forget to tell her father the interesting story that had just happened. These were obviously much more interesting than those bulky boxes and computers. In Shanghai, at the recording site of a very popular indoor comedy variety show called Star and Star's Fate, Zhu Jia, as a celebrity host, and 2 other professional hosts, Dong Wei and Shui Linglong, were hosting the show together. Okay, let's ask a more challenging question. Chao Tsong, you and Zhu Jia are both idol singers, Dong Wei said seriously, and the audience below the stage laughed. Chao Tsong couldn't help but laugh with them, but her laugh was very reserved. Sitting on a high chair, her short skirt revealed her long legs, looking very sexy and beautiful. Luckily, there was heating in the recording site. Otherwise, Chao Tsong's lips would have turned purple in the winter, just like the time when she and Murphy sang New Elite Chart together on the stage. Zhu Jia wasn't as reserved as Chao Tsong. He quickly waved his hands and ran in front of Dong Wei. He put his palms together and said exaggeratedly, Brother Wei, you think too highly of me. I'm not an idol singer. You see, I'm not handsome. Well, I'm just a little bit handsome. There was another burst of laughter below the stage. And the songs I sing are not popular. It's lucky that some fans of my songs like me. How could I dare to be on the same level as Sister Tsong and be an idol singer? Zhu Jie said and ran in front of Chao Tsong. The back of his hand gently lifted her soft hand and said with admiration, Sister Tsong, you're my idol. Chao Tsong was embarrassed by his words. She laughed with everyone, pulled Zhu Jie up, and said, No, Zhu Jie, you're also a very hard-working and talented artist. I also admire you for being able to compose your own songs. Hey, okay. Since Zhu Jie doesn't want to be an idol singer, then I can't do anything about it. Although I think that the new song you're about to release, what's it called? It has the potential to become an idol for young people. Dong Wei helped Zhu Jie advertise without leaving a trace, and praised his little brother. Chapter 598. Zhu Jie's new song was already being promoted. Tianmei had invested a lot of resources into it, and had even bought Microbroadcasting's homepage to advertise it. On November 15th, the new song would be released. Zhu Jie would also be challenging various singers on various major music chart shows. It was like another cycle. A year ago, Zhu Jie had also sung Mistress around this time. Since then, his singing had become a household name. Of course, he also had to bear a lot of criticism. And now that a year had passed, Zhu Jie had started afresh with a new song. He had already accumulated a certain amount of popularity, so what kind of performance would he have? Zhu Jie's fans were already looking forward to it. Of course, compared to looking forward to the results of his song, the fans were more looking forward to what kind of strange song Zhu Jie would sing. They knew the name of the song through Tianmei's promotions, but they had never heard of it before. Back to the set of the show. Dong Wei brought up the topic, and Xue Linglong also chimed in. It's called Impulsive Punishment. I heard that Zhu Jie, in order to sing this song well, you had painstakingly studied it for several months to hone your singing skills. I just didn't want to be called a lousy singer by everyone, so I wanted to learn from Sister Kong. I wanted to be like Sister Tsong and be an idol singer with both strength and beauty. It seemed like a slip of the tongue, but Zhu Jie seemed to realize it in hindsight. He quickly struck a charming pose to make up for it. It looked like he was pretending to be clumsy, which made everyone laugh again. This guy. His sense of variety was still very strong. Of course, they still had to return to the show. Zhu Jie knew when to stop. He waved his hand and laughed. Let's not talk about me. No matter how hard I work, I'm not as beautiful as Sister Tsong. Oh right, Brother Wei, what kind of challenging question do you want to ask Sister Tsong? This question is. Dong Wei dragged out his words, which gave Zhu Jie another chance to poke his nose into the conversation. Wait, Brother Wei, you can't ask about my privacy. You also know that idol singers have to pay attention to their personal image. Zhu Jie turned to look at Chao Tsong with a grin. Sister Tsong, don't worry. I will definitely not let them ask you if you have a boyfriend. You can just tell me in private later. Chao Tsong could not help but pat Zhu Jie. This guy really knew how to show off. However, this was also not bad. With Zhu Jie's interaction, Chao Tsong had a lot of screen time. Moreover, Chao Tsong was originally quite reserved. She still had the airs of an idol star on the stage. Now that Zhu Jie was making jokes, she relaxed a lot, and her smile was not so stiff. It's not a private question, but don't worry, you have to answer this question too. Dong Wei smiled and pointed at Zhu Jie. He finally asked this challenging question. As celebrities, how do you wash your clothes? Celebrities, especially idols, definitely place a lot of importance on how they dress up. However, washing clothes should be quite a problem. Moreover, it's even more troublesome for girls. Many of their undergarments can't be washed together with their outerwear. Xue Linglong said with a smile. She usually supplemented Dong Wei. Boys can't do that either. Linglong, do you think I threw all my clothes into the washing machine and washed them together? Zhu Jie cried out, feeling wronged. After a round of laughter, Chao Tsong answered the question. Actually, Our clothes are divided into several types. Some are for home, some are for going out, and some are for performances. Needless to say, some of the clothes for going out can't be washed with the washing machine. My assistant will help take them to the dry cleaners. Chao Tsong said. This statement was approved by Zhu Jie, Dongwei, and the others. Indeed, many clothes need to be dry cleaned, especially men's suits. Then some of the home outerwear and clothes that can be washed with the washing machine will be washed with the washing machine. The clothes that can't be washed with the washing machine, and some of my undergarments will be washed by hand. In fact, Chao Tsong had a script in advance, so her answer was very natural. She did not know if there was an expert guiding her behind the scenes. This answer also perfectly reflected her as an idol star, but she was still very down to earth. Zhu Jie jumped out again. He looked at Chao Tsong with heartache and said, Sister Tsong, you still want to wash your clothes by hand? Do you know that there are a lot of detergents on the market that are very harmful to the opponent's skin? It seemed that he was concerned about Chao Tsong, but the audience who had watched several episodes of this program couldn't help but laugh. They saw Zhu Jie take out a bottle of detergent from his back, as if he was performing magic. Without any shame, he openly advertised as a sponsor. Sister Tsong, let me recommend you a detergent. Big white detergent, clean handguard. Sister won't have to worry about washing clothes anymore. Ha ha ha, the audience laughed. Dongwei and Xue Linglong laughed until they were convulsing. Chao Tsong couldn't help but laugh. She blushed and took the empty bottle. Zhu Jie. Chao Tsong integrated into the atmosphere on the stage and began to interact. She smiled and asked, I'm very curious, how do you men wash clothes? Actually, I don't want to wash clothes at all. When I was young, I thought that if I could, I hoped to have new clothes to wear every day. That way, I can wear cool clothes every day, and I don't have to wash clothes anymore. Zhu Jie responded. And then? Chao Tsong looked at Zhu Jie curiously. You must be thinking that reality gave me a big slap in the face and told me not to daydream, right? Zhu Jie smiled slyly. Yes, poverty has limited your imagination. Dongwei and Xue Linglong nodded their heads and laughed. But actually the main reason why I gave up this idea was that I suddenly remembered that new clothes can only be worn after being washed. If I wear new clothes every day, I still have to wash clothes every day. What's the difference between wearing new clothes and not wearing new clothes? Zhu Jie said with a chagrined face. This train of thought suddenly made everyone burst into laughter. Okay, let's get down to business. How do you wash clothes? Chao Tsong laughed until she covered her stomach and said angrily, the other clothes are similar to what Sister Tsong said, but I have a special technique for washing socks. Not only does it not hurt my hands at all, but it is also very clean. Sister Tsong, do you want to learn? Zhu Jie asked. Wait, it doesn't hurt your hands again. You can't continue to advertise. Later, Big White Detergent will complain that we asked them to increase the advertising fee. Xue Linglong deliberately stopped Zhu Jie and joked. How can it be? How can I use such an obvious method to advertise for sponsors? Zhu Jie raised his head, as if he was very sad and angry. When it came to the specific method, Zhu Jie gestured with his two hands and said, if these were my feet, I would put on the socks first, then dip them in the detergent and rub them on the ground like this, rub them, and like this. Zhu Jie's performance was very vivid. His two hands were like feet, performing various techniques such as rubbing on the ground and rubbing his feet together in the air. This already made everyone laugh until they couldn't straighten their backs. After washing one side, there is still another side, turn it over, and wear it again. Zhu Jie was still performing as if he hadn't had enough. Chao Tsong, who was next to him, laughed so hard that she almost lost her image as an idol. Okay, if you continue to wash, will you stop? We know your special technique. Feeling, you said that it won't hurt your hands, so it won't hurt your hands. But won't it hurt your feet? Dongwei said with a smile. It doesn't matter, we still have Big White Detergent. Zhu Jie understood tacitly and once again left no trace to advertise. Everyone knows that Sahara Online Mall's Double 11 Super Shopping Festival is coming soon, right? Regardless of whether you are single or have a happy family, quickly turn on your computer and open the Sahara Online Mall's website. Big White Detergent has a super discount promotion on Double 11 Sahara Online Mall. 30 off for 100 units, 100 off for 200 units. If you buy it, you earn it. I wish everyone, including my most admired sister Tsong, that you won't hurt your hands or feet when you wash clothes at home in the future. This advertisement made everyone not angry at all, and they even had to laugh and applaud Zhu Jie's cleverness. In fact, everyone was already used to it, because this program had been bought by Sahara Online Mall a few episodes ago, and Big White Detergent was the title sponsor of this season's Star and Star Fate. Zhu Jie's advertising every time was also an interesting scene of this program. This program was broadcast on the eve of Double 11 Day. While the audience was laughing because of Zhu Jie, they were also reminded that Double 11 Day was coming. They couldn't wait to turn on their computers, check their shopping carts, favorites, and wait for the dawn to come, snatching the cheap products that were on sale for a limited time, and hoping that they could be one of the 200 lucky people who could get a free order. Chapter 599. Shishi, I'm coming to your house to play. On the evening of November 10th, before Yang Yi could put on his shoes and go out to open the door, Lan Xian's impatient voice could be heard from outside the gate of the courtyard. Shishi stood at the door of the villa, holding the door frame and shouting excitedly, "Right away, my papa will open the door right away. Here you are." However, compared with the voices of the two girls, Lan Xian's voice was obviously louder. Shishi's delicate voice was very pleasant, but it would be blown away by the wind for a while. Therefore, after a while, Lan Xian's clear voice could be heard again. "What did you say? I can't hear you." Cece's chest was still heaving up and down with excitement, and she still wanted to repeat it at the top of her voice. But Mo Fei stopped her and said, Okay, your papa will open the door for Xianer now." After a while, the guests finally arrived. Lans Hao Kai and Yang Yi were going to have a remote meeting in Yangqing City tonight. Lan Xian shouted that she wanted to come over and play with Shishi. He had to ask Wu Jingjing to take Lan Xian to take a bath quickly, and then the whole family came to Yang Yi's house. "You didn't hear me just now. Then did you hear what I said?" Cece also took a bath. The two little girls hugged each other, shouting and making a fuss. It was very lively. Lan Xian's mother also spent a lot of effort to take off her daughter's coat. Yang Yi's house was still heated. They asked the two girls in pajamas to go upstairs to play, where there were dolls and other toys that little girls liked to play with. When they went upstairs, Murphy said to Wu Jingjing with a smile, "Xianer's voice is so loud that I can hear her voice from far away. I think she is a good singer. You have to train her well." "Really?" Wu Jingjing asked in surprise. She liked singing, and Murphy was a professional singer. Wu Jingjing trusted her judgment. Now that the two little guys had company, they didn't stick to their parents. Murphy chatted with Wu Jingjing in her room next door. They still had a lot of common topics, such as children's education, Murphy's pregnancy, and even talking about clothes and cosmetics. However, Shishi and the others were still restless. The two girls chatted in the room for a while, and then they joined hands again. Holding each other's little hands, they opened the door and ran happily into the room next door. "Mom, why is Shishi's hair so long and mine so short?" Lan Xian enviously stroked Shishi's beautiful long hair that was draped over her back like a waterfall after her shower. "Because Shishi's hair hasn't been cut." Murphy smiled and pulled her daughter over. She took a comb and combed her daughter's wet hair while answering, "When you first met last year, Shishi's hair stopped here. This year it has grown longer. Look, it's here. I don't want to cut my hair." Shishi waited for her mother to finish speaking and quickly expressed her attitude. Little girls still like to be beautiful. Moreover, Shishi with long hair and a short body was beautiful. Lan Xian suddenly understood. She pouted and said unhappily, "But my mom always cuts my hair. It can't grow long. I want to be like Shishi." "You can't. You can't have long hair because it's very hot in summer. If you have long hair, you'll get heat rash. It's very itchy," Wu Jingjing explained. "That's right. Heat rash." Thinking of those red spots, Lon Xian trembled and said dejectedly. Well, I don't want to have long hair. It's okay, Xian Air. You're also beautiful with short hair. Murphy gave Lon Xian a thumbs up and said with a smile, Shishi, don't you think so? Cece raised her head to look at her mother and nodded subconsciously. However, the little one's topics changed very quickly. Shishi quickly smiled and shook her mother's hand. She pleaded, Mom, I want Xian Air to play at our house tonight. Then I want to sleep with her. Lon Xian also jumped excitedly and shouted, Yes, I want to sleep with Shishi. Murphy was stunned for a moment. She looked at Wu Jingjing with a smile, and then looked at Lon Xian and Shishi. She said, Then you have to get the permission of Xian Air's parents. Shishi blinked her big eyes and walked over. She hugged one of Wu Jingjing's knees and shook it gently. She asked coquettishly, Auntie Wu, can I? In fact, Shishi was very familiar with Wu Jingjing because she often went to Lon Xian's house to play. Wu Jingjing also loved this innocent and kind little girl very much. However, before Wu Jingjing agreed, Lon Xian shouted, Yes, yes. You want to stay at Shishi's house to sleep? Wu Jingjing smiled and asked, What will you do when you go to kindergarten tomorrow? I'll get up and go home tomorrow. Lon Xian's mind was still very clear. My papa can make super delicious breakfast. Shishi tried hard to promote her family's service. Yes, yes. Lon Xian looked forward to it even more. Sooner or later, this girl would be cheated by a candy. Wu Jingjing had to look at Murphy, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Murphy smiled and reached out to hold Wu Jingjing's hand. She said, Sister Jing, why don't you stay here tonight? I also want to talk to you. Yang Yi and the others don't know how long it will take, so you can just rest here. The children don't have to worry. You and Brother Lon can stay in the guest room. There are a few guest rooms on the 3rd floor. I'll ask Yang Yi to clean them up. It was decided. It just so happened that the study downstairs hadn't started yet. Yang Yi and Lans Hao Kai were also talking about other things. Therefore, Yang Yi came up to help clean up the guest rooms on the 3rd floor for Wu Jingjing and Lans Hao Kai to rest tonight. After he finished cleaning up, he went to see the 2 little girls playing in the master bedroom. As soon as he opened the door, Shishi and Lon Xian's laughter came out. The 2 little guys were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. He didn't know what they were playing. Seeing the movement at the door, Lon Xian screamed, Oh, Shishi, your father is here. It was as if Yang Yi had specially come to see if she was sleeping obediently. Lon Xian rolled over and snuggled into the blanket, causing a huge bump to form on the blanket. Shishi also giggled, as if it was very fun. She followed suit and got into the quilt. However, the little girl didn't get in completely, and her little butt was exposed outside. What are you doing? Don't be bored. Looking at the 2 little girls, Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh. He walked over and gently patted his daughter's little butt and the big bump in the quilt. Amused, the 2 little girls laughed sullenly under the quilt. Yang Yi reminded them not to run around and to sleep early if they were tired. Then he checked the child lock on the balcony door. He let the 2 little girls go and opened the door to go out. However, at the door, Yang Yi saw Steamed Bun, who had run over at some point and was wagging her tail, wanting to go in. No, you can't go in. Yang Yi blocked Steamed Bun and gently patted her little head. Steamed Bun seemed to understand. She lowered her head, feeling wronged. After a while, she curled up on the carpet at the door, resting her head on her forelegs. However, she would occasionally look at Yang Yi with her big black eyes. Her eyes seemed to be filled with melancholy. Yang Yi went to check the child lock on the balcony on the other side of the corridor. When he came back, he saw Steamed Bun's eyes. He laughed unhappily and said, Hey, you feel wronged, right? You're not my daughter. Do you think I'll be coaxed by your pitiful little eyes? Calling her a daughter and not a son was fine. After all, Steamed Bun was a female dog. As Yang Yi said this, he squatted down and smiled as he picked up Steamed Bun's face and rubbed it. However, this little pitiful girl still couldn't raise her spirits. She looked wronged as if Yang Yi was discriminating against her. Okay, Yang Yi admitted that he was soft-hearted. He rubbed Steamed Bun's clean fur. He had just bathed her in the afternoon, so her fine fur was very comfortable to touch. Okay, don't be sad. I'll let you go in and play. Yang Yi opened the door again and gestured for Steamed Bun to enter. Steamed Bun suspiciously raised her head, but she quickly understood what her master meant. She immediately became spirited and cheerfully ran in. Steamed Bun. The two little girls' voices and laughter increased in volume. You're not allowed to run onto the bed. If you go onto the bed to play, I won't let you in next time. Yang Yi didn't care if Steamed Bun could understand, or if Steamed Bun didn't pay attention to what he was saying while the two girls were arguing. Let them play by themselves. Yang Yi went downstairs, sat in front of Lan Cao Kai, and poured him a cup of hot tea. Where were we talking? Right, about buying the land. Yang Yi smiled and continued to talk to Lan Cao Kai. Chapter 600. Before this, Yang Yi had done some investigations and careful plans. However, Yang Yi had no experience and ability in the real estate industry. If he wanted to get his target land, he still needed the help of Lan Cao Kai, a real estate tycoon. In terms of business, although Lan Cao Kai was happy to help Yang Yi, the amount involved was too large. He needed to use nearly 800 million yuan in the initial stage. Obviously, this was not a small favor. Yang Yi also needed to offer the corresponding cooperation conditions. I still have 34% of the shares in the Sahara Online Mall. If I want to sell, you have the priority to buy within 5 years. Also, if I don't make a move within 5 years, I will sell you 4% of the shares at 80% of the market price at that time. Yang Yi's conditions were like an illusion. However, Lan Cao Kai's eyes lit up. He understood that the Sahara Online Mall was now a hot steamed bun. After more than a year of development, the market value had soared to almost 8 billion yuan. After tonight's doubles 11, the overall market value could increase by a lot. Before it was listed, Sahara was already a miracle. It was also the most cost-effective investment he had ever made. His investment advisor also analyzed with him that if Sahara was listed, then the 15% shares in his hands could definitely be sold at a sky-high price. If he really wanted to sell, it was not impossible to make a net profit of several times the amount. However, Lan Cao Kai was certainly reluctant to sell. Now, Yang Yi and Fu Jun were also holding on to the shares in their hands. They would not let go until it was listed, so Lan Cao Kai had no way to get more. Now, Yang Yi's condition really scratched Lan Cao Kai's itch. Of course, 5 years was still a long time. However, Lan Cao Kai felt that it was worth his help if he counted the favor of Yang Yi for pulling him into this. Why do you want to sell the shares of Sahara? However, Yang Yi's words also made Lan Cao Kai's heart beat faster. He asked puzzledly, "Is there any change in Sahara?" "Of course not. I just need to raise funds to build the world's largest and most luxurious amusement park for my daughter." Yang Yi shook his head with a wry smile. He didn't try to hide it. He told her that he had invested so much for his daughter's amusement park. This made Lan Cao Kai a little speechless. He couldn't help but shake his head and click his tongue. You started from scratch and earned so much in just a few years. In the end, you're telling me that you're just earning money to build a paradise for your daughter. I think all the rich people in the world would be ashamed to death. Without going too far, Lan Cao Kai solemnly began to talk to Yang Yi about the commercial land they wanted. It was slightly different from his previous life. In this world, although the land in China was not permanently held by private individuals, it was still valid for 300 years, which was similar to a permanent holding. Jiangnan's Jinling City's Wuqing County. There's a piece of land that the developer ran away with. No one has been interested in it for more than a decade. I want to take it down. Yang Yi spread out the map of Jinling City's Wuqing County and said to Lan Cao Kai, "You should be familiar with Jinling City. I've checked. You've also taken a few pieces of land there. There are 3 residential areas." Lan Cao Kai looked at the place Yang Yi was pointing at and couldn't help but look surprised. "Why here?" Lan Cao Kai looked at Yang Yi in surprise. Although this piece of land has been quiet for more than a decade, it's still very famous in Jiangnan's real estate industry. To be exact, it was a legend. In the 1970s, Wuqing County was considered a small industrial city. Like other coastal cities, it had developed industries, especially the plastic industry and the shoe industry. At that time, there were a few state-owned shoe factories that could be considered the leading shoe industry in Jiangnan. However, Wuqing County's terrain wasn't as flat as other cities. It had a hilly terrain. Compared to other cities in Jinling City, it had more mountains and rivers. It had a huge disadvantage in terms of transportation. As the leaders of Wuqing County's government were promoted and retired, the new leaders were eager to overturn the previous leaders' achievements and establish their own authority. The development of Wuqing County's shoe industry gradually slowed down. In addition to the poor geographical conditions, many factories moved to more suitable places. At the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, Wuqing County seemed to have changed completely. However, the withdrawal of the shoe factories and the plastic industry wasn't a bad thing for Wuqing County. Although the economic development slowed down, there was less pollution. Gradually, the green mountains, clear water, blue sky, and white clouds were restored. The piece of land that Yang Yi was talking about was the territory of several state-owned shoe factories. At that time, the factories had their own dormitory area, primary school for workers' children, and even a hospital. The entire piece of land covers an area of nearly 700,000 square meters. Lans Haokai said as he recalled. To be exact, it's 750,000 square meters, or 1,125 mu. Yang Yi calmly gave the accurate data. It seemed that he had indeed put in a lot of effort. This piece of land was very big, but it was only compared to the real estate used to build houses. It was not enough to build an amusement park. However, Yang Yi was also eyeing an island across the water from this piece of land. However, he did not have the capital to take over this island yet. Back then, in order to take over this piece of land, Lianhua Real Estate spent a lot of effort to bribe the leaders of Wuqing County, and even Jinling City. In the end, just when they spent money to move the original residents away, those leaders were exposed. Lans Haokai lamented. How much capital did Lianhua Real Estate have back then? However, they were implicated. The boss was arrested and started to collapse. The real estate development of that piece of land also came to a halt. However, the legend that Lans Haokai spoke of was far more than that. At the end of the 90s, the new leaders of Wuqing County were deceived by a fake Hong Kong businessman. They sold the land of the bankrupt Lianhua Real Estate to the other party, and even actively helped him apply for a bank loan. In the end, the other party got the loan and ran away, never to be heard from again. The new leaders were all stripped of their official titles, but they also left behind a mess and made Wuqing County the laughingstock of the whole country. This was also why the previous leaders of Wuqing County were unwilling to mention it. Then, as the development of the other side of the county was in full swing, this remote scar was gradually covered by the dust of history. If you want to take this piece of land, if you don't mind the saying that whoever touches it will be unlucky, this piece of land is also a good choice. After Lans Haokai finished the story, he calmly analyzed. At least, no one is interested in it now, so it won't cost too much to buy it. The problem is, even if it's not expensive, it's still more than 1,000 mu of land. Do you have enough cash? I prepared 800 million. If it's not enough, I'll add more depending on the situation. Yang Yi said firmly. I have to take this piece of land, and I have to take it in one piece. 800 million. Lans Haokai looked at Yang Yi with some surprise. He didn't know that Yang Yi sold China's Facebook, but he didn't ask in detail about Yang Yi's source of funds. He only pondered for a moment and said, 800 million shouldn't be a problem, but you might have to negotiate with the local government. Lans Haokai felt like he was missing some information about this piece of land, like there was a secret behind it, but he couldn't remember it at the moment. However, Lans Haokai didn't have time to think about it, because in Yangcheng, Fu Jun had just finished inspecting the employees of Sahara Online Mall who were anxiously waiting for the midnight battle. His secretary was in the conference room adjusting the remote conference equipment for him and the other executives. We'll talk later, let's watch Singles Day first, Yang Yi said to Lans Haokai as he turned on the camera and sound. Chapter 601. Mu Yuyan, the teacher of Shishi's class at Springfield Kindergarten, usually went to bed early at 11 p.m. After all, she had to wake up early the next morning to make breakfast for her husband and son, and then go to work at the kindergarten. But tonight, when it was close to midnight, Mu Yuyan still couldn't fall asleep. She opened her eyes and looked at the time. She couldn't help but roll over and put on a thick coat over her silk pajamas. She pushed open the door to the living room. Under the dim light in the living room, Mu Yuyan's husband was watching TV. There was a laptop on the table next to him, but the screen was off. Only the blue working indicator was on. Hearing the movement, Mu Yuyan's husband looked at her strangely and asked, "Why are you up? Didn't we agree that I would pay for everything in your shopping cart in the wee hours of the morning?" "I'm worried. What if you forget? Or if you click too slowly? Or if you buy the wrong things? You men are so stupid when it comes to shopping." Mu Yuyan shook her head and said. Mu Yuyan's husband shook his head helplessly and said, "Okay, you do it yourself." Mu Yuyan was already sitting in front of the computer. She used the mouse for a while until halftime. Her husband turned on the living room lights and walked over to her. "It's only been a while and you bought so much? You bought a lot of clothes and shoes before. Why are you buying more now?" He looked at the extra items in the shopping cart and asked in surprise. "It's cheap. Look at this roll of paper. It usually costs more than 30 yuan at the supermarket, but now it's only 50 yuan for 3. And this shampoo." Mu Yuyan nagged on about her husband's life experience. Not to mention, other than the discount, all the cell phone products on Singles Day will be sold at a discount of 50 yuan if the total is 300 yuan. When has there ever been such a good deal? Buy as much as you can. The problem is, can you finish buying so much? Sure, if we buy so much, we won't have to go to the supermarket for half a year. Also, if we have more, we can send some to our parents. Mu Yuyan wasn't sleepy at all and said in high spirits. This scene was playing out all over the country. And it wasn't just women who went crazy. Men also couldn't help but open their wallets. Just like in Guangzhou, Mu Yuqing stayed in front of his computer. His shopping cart was also stuffed with many things. For example, the game consoles, indoor treadmills, and other big products that he usually coveted were also organized in the Sahara Online Mall on Singles Day with discounts and promotions. Of course, Mu Yuqing could not miss this good opportunity. However, even though they both had the same surname, Mu Yuqing wasn't as crazy as Mu Yuyan. He had already gathered everything in the shopping cart a few days ago. Now Mu Yuqing refreshed the Sahara Online Mall's webpage again and again. It was not that he wanted to grab the so-called free-of-charge opportunity, but that Mu Yuqing, as a senior in the IT industry, did a small test. It's already 11:55, and the webpage is still refreshing smoothly. There's no sign of a traffic jam. Mu Yuqing was a little surprised and muttered to himself. So what's the reason for this? Did the Sahara Online Mall's 11/11 promotion get messed up? No one came to join in the fun? Of course, Mu Yuqing himself didn't believe in this assumption. Since the end of October, Sahara Online Mall's promotion for the November 11th shopping festival had been fully launched. All the industry insiders were amazed by this shopping festival. Of course, the idea of a shopping festival was not very new. On New Year's Day this year, Sahara Online Mall had organized a promotion, and the effect was not bad. However, what Mu Yuqing and the others valued was the hype of the shopping festival's operation. The November 11th that went viral early on the internet was a meme for Singles Day. Now, even if Sahara did not admit it, Mu Yuqing knew who was behind the rapid promotion of this topic. Compared to the overwhelming publicity, what shocked the industry insiders was the discount of Sahara Online Mall's promotion this time. With such a discount, the entire Chinese population would go crazy if they saw it. Obviously, the manufacturers behind Sahara also gave a lot of support. However, to obtain such support, Sahara must have prepared for a long time before this. These could still be inferred. Another thing that made the internet industry excited was that this holiday carnival covered a wide variety of products, from household necessities to kitchen firewood, from oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea, from clothes, bags, shoes, to sports equipment, outdoor equipment, from small mobile phones, computers, and other digital products to large refrigerators, washing machines, and other household appliances. There were too many. Household necessities like paper towels, firewood, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea, refrigerators, washing machines, and so on, these products that were too small or too big, people basically did not think of buying them on the internet. However, now it appeared on Sahara Online Mall. Ever since the clothing market was shaken, Sahara Online Mall had finally ignited the war between online stores and physical stores in almost all industries. This November 11th shopping festival is a shopping carnival for the people of the country, and it is also a carnival for the internet industry. If it succeeds, it proves that the internet will eventually change our world and most of our living habits. If it fails, sorry, I can't think of any possibility that Sahara Online Mall will fail. Zhu Jian, the godfather of the domestic internet, the founder and chairman of SNS, gave Sahara Online Mall a very high evaluation in an interview with Internet Weekly a week ago. Mu Yuqing did not believe that Sahara Online Mall would mess up, so if it did not mess up, it meant that their servers were well prepared to cope with a large number of visits. There's an expert behind Sahara Online Mall. But then again, without an expert, who could create a company worth close to 10 billion in just a year or two? Mu Yuqing secretly exclaimed. However, just as he was letting his imagination run wild, it was already past midnight. Mu Yuqing came back to his senses and refreshed the web page with interest. He clicked on the payment button with the millions of people in the country. This time the web page lagged a little. It was expected. Add the backup server. Guangzhou Sahara Online Mall was bustling with activity. Fu Jun patted the table. He was still calm, but his voice was a little excited as he ordered. Boss, don't worry, we have a plan. This small disturbance is expected. It will be dealt with immediately. The technical director comforted him. The scene was noisy. Fu Jun and the others did not have time to communicate with Yang Yi and Lance Hao Kai. However, Lance Hao Kai was looking at the screen with great interest. He knew that the more lively it was, the more it meant that they had succeeded. Yang Yi was relatively calm. He had expectations for the current situation and the possible results in the future. Moreover, no matter how prepared Sahara Online Mall was, it was the first time it held a promotion. It was impossible for it to be like a certain cat in Yang Yi's previous life, who could break through 100 million or 1 billion in minutes. Since it could not be compared, the results that they could achieve now would not shock him. What was there to be anxious about? I'm going to check on the children. Although they are asleep, Shishi likes to kick off her blanket at night. Yang Yi nodded at Lance Hao Kai and smiled. Ah, you're not waiting for the data? Lance Hao Kai asked in surprise. What surprised him even more was that Yang Yi was as calm as a bystander. Lance Hao Kai's hands were shaking. He wanted to know how high the sales of this event would be. It's still early. Look at them, they are still busy dealing with the problem. It will take at least 10 minutes for the data to come out. What's the point of waiting? Yang Yi smiled casually. Besides, aren't you still here? I'll come back after seeing the children. If they have the data, you can write it down and tell me. Chapter 602. Yang Yi went upstairs and opened the door to the master bedroom. Steamed Bun, who was sleeping on the carpet, was very vigilant. It was unknown when it had raised its head, but in the darkness, it was looking at Yang Yi with a pair of bright eyes. Of course, the loyal Steamed Bun knew that it was the big master from the sounds and smells, so it only raised its head and didn't attack. Shoo! Yang Yi turned on the light in the master bedroom and waved his hand at Steamed Bun. Steamed Bun didn't understand. Instead, it got up and ran to the big master's feet. It rubbed its head and wagged its tail, acting spoiled. Yang Yi didn't care about it. Looking at the two little girls on the big bed, he couldn't help but smile. As expected, Shishi kicked off her blanket. Fortunately, there was a heater in the master bedroom, so she didn't have to worry about catching a cold. But the scene in front of him was a bit interesting. Lan Xian slept on her stomach, her head turned to Yang Yi. Yang Yi could see that her small mouth was open, and her saliva had wet a pillow towel. Shishi's sleeping posture wasn't any better. Although she slept on her back, she didn't sleep well. Her limbs were spread out, and she even turned around to form a perpendicular line with Lan Xian. Not only that, but the little girl's slender legs and cute little feet were resting on Lan Xian's chubby little butt, as if it was very comfortable to rest on it. Otherwise, why would there be a faintly discernible smile on the little girl's delicate face? After looking at his daughter's sleeping posture for a while, Yang Yi shook his head. He walked to the bedside, stretched out his arms, and lifted the little girl's legs. Then, he wrapped his arms around her back and gently lifted her up. He turned her body and let her sleep on her little pillow. Lan Xian was the same. Yang Yi let the little salted fish turn over, and changed her pillow towel while he was at it. Finally, after covering them with the blanket, Yang Yi bent down and patted steamed Bun's head, turned off the light, and left. When Yang Yi left, Lan Xiaokai was a bit bored. He casually flipped through the map of Wuqing County on the table. It was mainly about the piece of land that Yang Yi had mentioned. However, when Lan Zhoukai looked through it this time, he made a new discovery. General's Shrine? Seeing these 3 words, Lan Xiaokai's mind suddenly flashed with a flash of inspiration. He remembered the secret that he had forgotten to cut out earlier. However, Lan Xiaokai couldn't help but frown and muttered to himself, "This doesn't make sense. Yangyi is Anqing province, and his ancestors are farmers." Just as Lan Zhoukai was staring at the map with a frown, Yang Yi returned. "What are you looking at?" asked Yang just as Lan Xiaokai was about to ask his question. There was finally a response from Yangqing City. A staff member waved his hands excitedly and shouted, "It's out, the data is out." Urgent matters were more important, so Lan Xiaokai and Yang Yi quickly turned to look at the screen on the wall. Fu Jun, who was dressed in a suit but had loosened his tie, smiled. He waved his fingers and shouted, "Put it on the big screen." Very quickly, rows and rows of data appeared on the screen. "Yang Yi, Boss Lan, did you guys see it?" Fu Jun moved closer to the secondary camera and said excitedly to Yang Yi and the others, 1 minute and 47 seconds. The transaction amount broke 10 million. Was it that scary? The fat on Lan Xiaokai's face couldn't help but tremble. Of course, Yang Yi was still very calm. After all, in his previous life, it wasn't as if he hadn't seen figures like breaking 100 million, a billion, or even 10 billion in a few minutes. Fu Jun was beyond excited. This number was even higher than his highest expectations. After calming himself down, he said, "From the current performance of the data, it will probably break 100 million in the next half an hour or so." There was no need to wait for it to break 100 million. Such an exciting number was already enough for them to celebrate. Lan Xiaokai opened the red wine he had brought and poured Yang Yi a glass as well. They clinked glasses with Fu Jun, who was far away in Yangcheng, and the other executives and staff in the conference room to celebrate their success. Yang Yi took a sip and stopped. He no longer drank alcohol. After everyone had calmed down, Yang Yi said to Fu Jun, "The most important thing is to know the final transaction amount. It can be used as a guide for our future manufacturers. However, the most important thing now is to wait until the transaction amount breaks 100 million, then announce the good news on micro-broadcasting." "Wouldn't that be too ostentatious?" Fu Jun asked doubtfully. Yang Yi's lips curled up slightly and said, "Yes, we have to be ostentatious. Our 11/11 shopping carnival is like a party. The more lively it is, the more people will participate. Think about it, our transaction amount broke 100 million in less than half an hour. Wouldn't the spectators who saw everyone buying and buying rush to join in as well?" This logic wasn't hard to understand. People had the mentality of following the crowd. Therefore, Fu Jun quickly understood. He nodded, called his secretary, and ordered him to do so. Fu Jun and the others still had work to do in the Sahara Desert. Yang Yi and Lan Xiaokai turned off the sound and continued to discuss their matters. "Brother Yang, tell me honestly, aside from the amusement park you mentioned, do you have any other intentions for taking this piece of land?" Lan Xiaokai's face finally turned serious as he asked Yang Yi seriously. "What other intentions?" Yang Yi felt a chill in his heart. However, he controlled his expression very well and didn't show any fluctuations in his heart. Instead, he showed his doubts. "What do you mean? This general shrine?" Lan Xiaokai pointed at the map and said. However, Lan Xiaokai was a little disappointed that he didn't see any fluctuations in Yang Yi's expression. General's Shrine? Yang Yi first looked at Lan Cao Kai in confusion, then looked down at the map. He seemed to think for a while before he suddenly smiled. I remember, Lianhua Real Estate had some disputes in this regard before. The General's Shrine seems to be the ancestral shrine of a historical figure. Lianhua Real Estate insisted on demolishing it, but it caused a dispute with the villagers. Later, nothing was settled. You really don't know? Lan Cao Kai breathed a sigh of relief. Instead, he excitedly said, "Let me tell you. You know the Yang army of the previous dynasty, right? They were the most powerful army in resisting the Japanese invaders. At that time, the Yang army had more than 30,000 soldiers from Jiangnan. They killed the Japanese invaders on the coast until they cried for their parents. But you're from Anqing, so you might not know this, but the Yang clan's army was stationed in Jinling City. Because Jinling City is close to Min Province, it was able to take care of the two places that were most heavily raided. General Yang had also settled his family in Wuqing County. This general's shrine is the remains of the Yang clan's ancestral hall." Lan Cao Kai sighed. Lan Cao Kai didn't need to tell Yang Yi about this history. Yang Yi was much more familiar with it than he was. Moreover, Yang Yi also knew why his ancestors settled his family in Wuqing County. It was because this was the headquarters of the Yang Army's navy. The other uninhabited island that Yang Yi had his eyes on was the training ground for their navy. I asked you this before because I thought you had some connection with the Yang Army. However, there are many people with the surname Yang. Moreover, you are from Anqing Province. I was thinking too much. Lan Cao Kai smiled and waved his hand. Yang Yi smiled slightly, but he sighed secretly in his heart. You didn't think too much. I didn't know you knew so much. However, the fewer people who know about that past, the better. I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you. Big brother Lan Cao Kai hesitated for a moment, then shook his head and said, "There is something I need to tell you. It is a rather secretive matter. I heard my father talk about it before. There should be very few people who know about it now. However, I feel that if you want to invest so much money in this, it would be best for you to understand." Amidst Yang Yi's silent shock, Lan Cao Kai told him about the great things that Yang Jie, who was also his father, Yang Chonggoe, had done in the Japanese territory. Of course, Lan Cao Kai didn't know the details. He only gave a rough description and emphasized the story of the old master burning down the shrine. Lan Cao Kai was exultant as he spoke, as if he had personally experienced it. I heard that the person who did this was a descendant of the Yang army. Then the Japanese diplomats even came to investigate. It was my father who told me about this. My father had some friends who were high officials in Jiangnan in his early years, so he knew about this. Lan Cao Kai's face was full of admiration as he said ruefully, "It's a pity that I didn't get to know this great hero. Moreover, after so many years, the hero is probably no longer around." Yang Yi's stomach was about to cramp from laughing. He thought to himself, "You actually know him, and you even shook his hand and talked to him before." I'm telling you this mainly because I want to tell you that the General's Shrine isn't simple. With so many complicated relationships, do you still want this piece of land? Lan Cao Kai became serious as he looked at Yang Yi. Yes. It's hard to find such a big piece of land that doesn't have any disputes over demolition. Yang Yi smiled as if nothing had happened. Moreover, you don't have to worry about the General's Shrine. How big is the General's Shrine? It's not even worth mentioning compared to the land I want to build an amusement park. You can tell the local government that the amusement park we build will bypass this place and let it retain its original appearance. That's not what I meant. Lan Cao Kai said helplessly. Yang Yi knew that Lan Cao Kai didn't mean that, but he wasn't worried because Yang Yi had also gone to Wuqing County to investigate. The entire land was like a ghost town, deserted and full of grass. Moreover, near the General's Shrine, not to mention the Japanese, it was more likely that there would be ghosts. He believed that after so many years, the people that Yang Chonggoe mentioned would have already left. After all, no matter how big the matter was, it would fade with time. The Japanese couldn't possibly spend money to hire people to watch over it. Lan Cao Kai was more considerate than Yang Yi. He touched his stomach and pondered. Although you're not a member of the Yang family army, your surname is still Yang. If people with ulterior motives find out, it will still cause some trouble. How about this? Use my name to buy this piece of land. I'll sign a transfer contract with you, but on the surface, use my company to show up. You just have to control it behind the scenes. Yang Yi was stunned. He didn't expect Lan Hao Kai to think so much for him. This. Big brother Lan, I don't know how to thank you. Yang Yi felt that his plan was even more perfect. What are you thanking me for? Shi and Xian Air are good friends. You and I are good friends too. If we were in ancient times, we would be friends for generations. Moreover, you promised to sell the shares of Sahara Online Shopping Center to me. You need money to build your amusement park anyway. Lan Hao Kai chuckled and said, in the end, not only will I not lose money, I'll even earn more, so there's no need to thank me. Yang Yi laughed. Originally, I was so touched that I was prepared to invite you to participate in this project. But now that you've said it, I think it's fine. Hee, this amusement park of yours, to spend so much money on it, it's practically a bottomless pit. If you want me to participate, I won't be willing. Lan Hao Kai smiled proudly. Yang Yi shrugged and only smiled without saying anything. Wait. Lan Hao Kai started to waver. He frowned and looked at Yang Yi. Old brother Yang, from what I know about you, you never do business that loses money. Could your amusement park be profitable? Yang Yi laughed meaningfully. Chapter 603. Yang Yi and Lan Hao Kai talked about the amusement park until very late into the night. Even after the meeting with the people in Yangcheng, they were still discussing some problems with the operation of the amusement park. Yang Yi wasn't afraid to tell Lan Hao Kai, because all the IP was in his hands. They chatted almost all night, so early the next morning, when Yang Yi went to wake Shi and Lan Xian up, Lan Hao Kai had just returned to his own villa to sleep. We worked too late last night. Big brother Lan went back to rest first. You and Xian Air can have breakfast at my place before going back. Yang Yi said to Wu Jingjing. Oh, it's okay. He's always like this when he's busy with work, Wu Jingjing said with a smile. She had also woken up, and was now helping the sleepy Lan Xian get dressed. The little girl who had been woken up didn't seem to have had enough sleep. Wu Jingjing turned around to grab a sweater, but didn't manage to catch her. Lan Xian fell back in a daze again. Ha ha ha. She was awake. She hugged her little blanket and sat on the bed. She turned to look at her little friend's sleepy face and couldn't help but laugh. What are you laughing at? Early in the morning, Yang Yi heard his daughter's sweet laughter and couldn't help but feel happy. He rubbed the little girl's head and said, Get up. Daddy will take you to wash your face and brush your teeth, then do some exercise. It's time for breakfast. Leaving the bedroom to Wu Jingjing, Yang Yi walked out with the energetic Shi. Papa, the sun is already up and Xian Air is still sleeping. The little girl was still happily holding her father's hand and jumping around happily. Maybe it's because she's not used to sleeping? After all, it's her first time sleeping at home, so she didn't sleep well last night. Yang Yi explained to his daughter, Don't talk about other people. Didn't you also not wake up a few days ago? Of course not, hee. The little girl stuck out her tongue in embarrassment. She even broke free from her father's hand, and ran to the front with a bell-like laughter, so that she could not see her father's teasing expression. When it was time for breakfast, Lan Xian woke up. For breakfast today, Yang Yi broke the usual routine, and made Chinese crepes for everyone. Everyone knew that jianbing was not a new dish, but it was the first time Lan Xian and Shi had seen it, especially Lan Xian. When the little girl saw the delicious and fragrant jianbing, her saliva almost flowed out like a waterfall. It was not difficult to make crepes. Other than the fruit that was bought, Yang Yi had mixed all the other ingredients by himself. Yang Yi had all kinds of kitchen utensils in his house. He made a big frying pan, turned on a small fire, brushed it with a thin layer of oil, scooped some flour paste, spread it flat, and then sprinkled the egg mixture, spread it flat. Those who had eaten the Chinese crepes were more familiar with these processes, so there was nothing much to say. It was worth mentioning that Yang Yi added some fresh tomatoes in addition to lettuce, ham, and fruit. Although the heat was not enough to cook the tomatoes, They could be eaten raw just like the lettuce. In addition, there was also fried bacon that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. Of course, Yang Yi did not put youtiao in it, as he was afraid that the two little girls would eat too hot. He added a little more lettuce and tomatoes. There were red, green, yellow, white eggs, meat, vegetables, and crunchy fruit. This Chinese crepe naturally looked and smelled good, and the two little girls were very hungry. Before eating the Chinese crepes, drink some soy milk to warm your stomach. Yang Yi poured soy milk for Lan Xian, and said with a smile to the little girl who could not sit still. She did not need her father to remind her. She quickly picked up the cup and began to drink. She gulped down a few mouthfuls, and then she did not forget to lick the soy milk on her lips. Xianer, the soy milk is delicious. She turned her head and said to Lan Xian with a smile. The little girl was eating breakfast with her friends, so she was in a very good mood. She unconsciously played the role of the little host, and persuaded her friends to drink the soy milk. Is the soy milk in your house freshly ground? It tastes very good. Wu Jingjing was full of praise. Well, I bought the soy milk myself. The soy milk made from it is thicker, and there is no need to add sugar. If you add a little coconut powder, the taste will be sweeter, Murphy said to Wu Jingjing. I see. Wu Jingjing felt that she had learned a trick, so she nodded with a smile. Don't look at me like that. I'm not so good. Yang Yi did it, and then I just watched him do it. The more I watched, the richer my theoretical knowledge became. Murphy pretended for a while, and finally she could not help but laugh and confess to Wu Jingjing. Yes, Murphy now knew how to cook those dishes. Because she was too bored after being pregnant, she often went to watch Yang Yi cook. Yang Yi also tirelessly told her why he put vinegar, cooking wine, and so on. But rich theoretical knowledge was one thing, and practical experience was another. When Murphy was about to cook, she was in a hurry and her mind was blank. She was not as relaxed as she was now. After drinking the soy milk, the two little girls could not wait to deal with the Chinese crepes on their plates. It was definitely inconvenient to use chopsticks. Under Yang Yi's reminder, Shi and Lan Xian, who had washed their hands, directly started to eat half of the Chinese crepes. The first bite, Shi's mouth was not big, so she ate the outer layer of the crepe. The crepe with egg was a little thick, but it was quite fragrant. The texture of the egg made the crepe not so monotonous. Of course, the second bite was even better. The little girl bit into the half-cut ham sausage, and she even pulled out a lettuce from the Chinese crepe. Coupled with the crispy biscuit-like fruit, Shi's eyes lit up. Next, the juicy bacon and sweet and sour tomatoes gradually appeared on the little girl's path of exploration. It was so delicious. The little girl looked at her father with a smile in her big eyes, but she did not have time to talk. Lan Xian was even more so. She ate until some crumbs and vegetable leaves fell on her plate, table, and clothes, but she did not care at all. She buried her head and tore at the crepes for a while. Obviously, Shi and Lan Xian, the two little girls, could not finish half of the Chinese crepe no matter how big their appetites were. There were still some leftovers. Shi lazily lay in the chair and burped. She stuffed the rest of the Chinese crepe to her father, so that the food would not be wasted. Lan Xian, on the other hand, was reluctant. Although she ate until her little belly was bulging, Wu Jingjing was worried that her stomach would explode. She advised her not to eat anymore. Lan Xian almost cried. No, I don't want it. How could she bear to throw away the delicious food? Then take a bag and put it back. If you still want to eat, you can continue to eat, okay? Wu Jingjing had to change her strategy. Next time, if you still want to eat, you can come to Shi's house. Uncle will make it for you. Murphy also helped to coax Lan Xian. The little foodie reluctantly put it down. The excitement of the Sahara Singles Day shopping festival became the focus of major media reports the next day. It even became the headline. It broke 10 million in a little over a minute, 100 million in 25 minutes, and then 500 million in transaction volume was announced at 8 o'clock in the morning. It shocked the world that had not experienced the online shopping craze. In just a few hours, the Sahara Online Mall had sold so many goods. This number, on other online shopping platforms, probably could not reach this amount in a year and a half, right? Not to mention the physical stores. How many shopping malls could have annual sales exceeding 100 million? Of course, this was just the beginning. The next day, the official micro-broadcasting of the Sahara Online Mall announced that the total transaction volume for the day reached 1.93 billion. Almost all the media reported this phenomenal result. If the Sahara Online Mall is listed now, it will probably become another internet company with a market value of 10 billion. Someone was already calculating the impact of the Sahara Online Mall on the Singles' Day shopping festival. In fact, the market value of 10 billion was still underestimating the Sahara Online Mall. If an investment bank wanted to invest in Fujun with a market value of 10 billion, Fujun would not even look at it. Moreover, if it was listed with the power of capital, the Sahara Online Mall could reach a market value of at least 20 billion. And then it could still climb all the way. Of course, the Sahara Online Mall had not reached a bottleneck in its development. Whether it was Fujun, Yangyi, or Lanzhou Kai, none of them had the idea of going public to earn money. Some powerful media and television stations even invited some economists and internet experts to discuss and analyze the secret of the Sahara Online Mall's success. In particular, many people were eager to know the reason why the Singles' Day shopping festival had such a terrifying impact. However, after much analysis, it did not help some online shopping platforms to surpass the Sahara Online Mall. They also wanted to organize a shopping festival, but they were surprised to find that the Singles' Day shopping festival had been registered first, and there were no other options for the other days that were related to Singles' Day, unless they chose New Year's Day and other holidays to compete with others. There was no other way. In order to not be further away from Sahara, they could only grit their teeth and go forward. However, even so, could a hastily prepared shopping festival be as good as the Sahara Online Mall? What kind of discounts could their manufacturers give customers to attract customers to leave Sahara and come to their shopping platforms? Now, one by one, they were still catching up, but they did not realize how much the Singles' Day shopping festival consumed the purchasing power of the people of the country. For daily necessities like paper towels, they bought half a year's supply at once. Would they continue to buy from other websites in a short period of time? This was just the beginning of the cold winter that the competitors of the Sahara Online Mall had to face. Chapter 604. Debeo, cover me. His comrade roared as he kicked open the door and rushed in. Debeo followed closely behind. The two of them, one in front and one behind, one on the left and one on the right, carefully searched the room. No one. They bent their legs and carefully moved forward. Suddenly, a masked female figure appeared in the corridor behind them. Debeo felt something and subconsciously turned around. Seeing this figure, Debeo was stunned for a moment, but seeing the gun in the other party's hand, he quickly reacted and raised his hand to shoot. However, one shot was not enough to make the other party fall, so Debeo added 2 more shots. Finally, the masked female target fell to the ground. Continue. The comrade in front hurriedly glanced, and they continued to search. After a fierce battle, the civilians in the training base were finally saved. However, this training was not only about whether the mission was completed, but also the time taken. The instructor first praised Debeo and his partner for completing the mission in the required time. But compared to your previous results, this training took 20 seconds more. This is a regression. The instructor reprimanded with a serious expression. Especially Debeo, you took too much time to kill the criminals. Look at these target papers. Where did your bullets go? Debeo did not refute, but only loudly admitted his mistake. Yes. Debeo still knew his problem. His reaction was slow, so he raised his hand and fired. The first shot was hurried and hit the target's abdomen. This was not fatal and gave the other party a chance to fight back. Although on the training ground these targets would not really fight back, but on the real battlefield, Debeo could not kill with one shot. This was a fatal threat to him and his comrades. Instructor, Debeo's shooting has not been very accurate. His comrade carefully explained for Debeo. His real skill is in close combat. On the battlefield, who cares about your skill level? Who will give you a chance to fight in close combat? Go back and continue to practice. You have to practice shooting accurately. You have to shoot directly at the vital points and eliminate the threat as quickly as possible, the instructor said resolutely. Yes. At night, Guadabeo lay in bed and could not fall asleep. After returning from the training base, he realized that he could not go on like this. Although it was a well-known fact that his shooting was inaccurate, Guadabeo used to be able to make a headshot at close range. But now his reaction was much slower. It should not be like this. Guadabeo was very clear about what the problem was. The analysis that Captain Oldley had given him before had really left a knot in his heart. It was the first time that Guadabeo liked a girl. It was the first time that he found this valiant girl so attractive to him. However, they lived in different worlds. Except for Yang Yi, he did not have any interactions with her, in the past, present, or future. He did not know what he should do, so he delayed it. But now Guadabeo realized that this was not going to work. If he kept thinking about it, he would only become more and more confused, and it would only affect his usual training. If it were not for the fact that the Jiangnan military region was in a peaceful Jiangnan, where they basically only trained and did not have many combat missions, he would have affected the entire mission, and even dragged his comrades into danger. He could not go on. It was the weekend. Yang Yi and his family came to the coffee shop to play again, mainly to bring Murphy out for some fresh air. It was rare that the sun was shining, and the cold weather in Jiangnan was warming up. On such a good weekend, Yang Yi naturally could not let Murphy stay at home. However, since it was winter, the number of students who came to the coffee shop to drink coffee had decreased. Most of the students chose to stay in the dormitory, classroom, or cafeteria. Except for a few coffee fans, most students were too lazy to come to the back door for a cup of coffee. This was also good. With fewer people, Murphy could walk around the shop leisurely. There was also soothing piano music in the shop. It was like a stream of notes flowing slowly, making people feel happy. The person playing the piano today was Miao Chuan. Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan had started to take turns playing the piano in the shop. Every few days, they would come with guitars and play their own songs for the customers in the shop, or sing some folk songs. It was like they had replaced Lin Mu An's position, but they were not willing to take Yang Yi's salary. They were working for free in the coffee shop. According to Lu Xiaoshu and Miao Chuan, they did not lack tuition fees or living expenses for the time being. They had not squandered the salary that Rong Huada had given them. In addition, when they came to the shop to play the piano and sing, they were also practicing. They did not give Yang Yi the cost of renting the venue and piano. How could they have the nerve to ask for Yang Yi's money? Yang Yi understood their real intention. Wasn't it to repay a debt of gratitude? They wanted to repay Yang Yi's legal fees. However, Yang Yi did not expose them. For the time being, he would let these two guys do it. He would see what happened later. It had to be said that Yang Yi was not God. He could not let everything go as he wished. In the first half of November, he basically had a smooth sailing. Whether it was Today You Will Marry Me, continuing to rank at the top of the new song sales chart, or the arrangement of the theme song he wrote for Soldier's Assault, whether it was the lawsuit of Qianli Chuanshu, or the Double 11 event of Sahara Online Mall, almost all of them met his expectations smoothly. But today, Yang Yi finally encountered a problem. Knowing that Yang Yi was in the coffee shop, Du Yuanlei hurried to find him and told him that The Fugitive was not going well and was being suppressed by the cinema chain. After The Fugitive was produced, the original plan was to be released during the Spring Festival next year. Although it was the debut film of a new director and there were no famous actors, the movie's plot was still very good. Even Old Master Jiang Lei praised it and supported Du Yuanlei's decision to go all out during the Spring Festival. Maybe a bicycle would turn into a motorcycle? But now, according to Du Yuanlei, The Fugitive only had a few % of the showtimes. Compared to other movies that were released during the Spring Festival, its showtimes were the lowest. This was obviously unreasonable. After all, The Fugitive was considered an excellent independent film. Even if it was not as good as movies that were backed by a film company, its showtimes should not be so low. What's the reason? Yang Yi frowned and asked. Do you know who is behind this? Although Du Yuanlei did not have much influence, she was a graduate student in the directing department of Jiangchuan Film Academy. Whether it was the support of the school, the connections of some teachers, or some senior brothers and sisters who had a certain amount of authority in the industry, Du Yuanlei's connections were not big, but they were not small either. It was not difficult to find out who was affecting the showtimes of The Fugitive. Du Yuanlei hesitated, looked at Yang Yi and said, "Global Pictures." Hearing this, Yang Yi understood everything. At the end of the day, it was his own influence. Prison Break had been pestering Global Pictures for so long, but in the end, it was given to Wolf TV. Su Zhongwei was able to become the CEO of the Zhonghua region, so he was obviously not a good person. He was wondering why Global Pictures was so calm. It turned out that they had been holding back and looking for an opportunity to make things difficult for him. But regarding this problem, Yang Yi did not have any solution. Yang Yi did not have any connections in the film industry. Chen Fengchen could not help him, and he could not fight over such a small matter. Luckily, Du Yuanlei did not come here to complain to Yang Yi. She also did not have the habit of relying on Yang Yi for everything. Du Yuanlei hesitated for a moment and said to Yang Yi, "There is a solution now. Teacher Xiang is helping us. If we arrange for the film to be released after the Spring Festival, that is in March, we can get 8% of the film in the cinema." Why were there so many good films in the Spring Festival showtimes? Why were the Spring Festival showtimes and the summer holidays known as the Golden Period? It was because the audiences in the country were the most free and willing to go to the cinema during this period. During this period, the box office sales would be the highest. March would be the off-season. Not only would there be fewer audiences, but there would also be fewer exciting films. It would be even harder for people to be interested in going to the cinema. But it seemed that The Fugitive did not have a better choice. "Let's do as you said." Yang Yi did not really care about the box office sales. After all, this was not only the result of his and Du Yuanlei's hard work, but also the hard work of Guozi, Gengsha, Teacher Xiang, Xixi and many others. Yang Yi thought for a while and said to Du Yuanlei, "Go back and get someone to make English subtitles. I'll get Xiaowan to make the arrangements. You all can bring the film to the film festival in the US and see if the foreigners are interested in our film." After sending Du Yuanlei off, Yang Yi welcomed a special but expected customer at the cafe. Chapter 605. When the wind chime at the door rang, Yang Yi was in their exclusive booth, talking and laughing with Murphy and Xixi. If it was an ordinary customer, this wouldn't have attracted their attention. But Ding Xiang was greeting the customer in English. "Good morning. What can I do for you, sir?" "Good morning, sir. What would you like?" As expected of a top student, Ding Xiang's English was very fluent. She didn't stutter due to nervousness, and even her pronunciation was very accurate. Of course, when Ding Xiang was in high school in her hometown, Yinye County, she was influenced by the teachers who were not good at speaking English. Many of the phonetic symbols were not accurate. It was only after she entered university that she practiced hard by following the tapes. "There are foreign customers?" Murphy wasn't surprised by Ding Xiang's English. She was curious about the customer. Yang Yi's coffee shop was very remote. At least when she came to the shop, she didn't see any foreign customers. Occasionally, the school invites some foreign teachers. When Yang Yi was still explaining to Murphy, the customer's response made him stop. "I don't know. It's hard to explain. My friend told me. I don't know. I don't know how to explain. My friend told me." The person who spoke was Lu Weisha's father, David. It wasn't easy for him to find this coffee shop, but it wasn't easy to confirm whether this coffee shop was the one opened by Yang Yi. The name coffee shop on the street corner, on the sign was Chinese. Of course, David couldn't understand it. Yang Yi only gave him the address, not the English name of the coffee shop. After David came in, he looked around and couldn't see Yang Yi. This made him feel even more embarrassed. Yes, Yang Yi's English name was Leon. David tried to ask Ding Xiang this name, but how would Ding Xiang know that Yang Yi's English name was this? When the two of them were stuck in a dilemma, Yang Yi finally came out to help them out. "David, you're here?" Yang Yi smiled and walked out of his booth with a little tail following behind him. When Xixi heard that Lu Weisha's father was here, she thought that Lu Weisha would come as well, so she happily followed her father out. However, after the little girl skipped out, she looked left and right, but did not see the back of her friend. Instantly, the bright smile on the little girl's face could not help but disappear. She was somewhat gloomy and somewhat puzzled as she looked at the adults. David was very happy to see Yang Yi. All the troubles he had caused to the coffee shop just now had disappeared. After chatting with Yang Yi for a while, he said that he would like to try the freshly ground coffee that Yang Yi had mentioned. Leave him to me. He's the father of one of Shishi's kindergarten friends. You go do something else. Yang Yi and David basically communicated in Swedish now, and it was a good opportunity for him to practice his spoken English. After a few words with David, he nodded to Ding Xiang, who was beside him. David was a customer and also Yang Yi's coffee friend. Therefore, Yang Yi came to the bar and took out the premium Mandheling coffee beans that he had bought last month. He personally ground the beans and brewed coffee for David. This coffee bean is not bad. Mandheling? I've never seen such a fragrant coffee before. It's like caramel, but it's more special than normal. It's very rich. David took a piece of coffee bean and couldn't help but exclaim. Yang Yi also felt proud that the coffee beans he had bought were praised by a coffee lover. He smiled proudly. Uncle David. Shishi finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She crawled under the bar and hugged her father's leg. Leaning against her father's waist, she looked up and summoned her courage to call out. Hello, Shishi. David lowered his head and greeted Shishi with a smile. The little girl didn't continue speaking. She tugged at her father's clothes and whispered. Papa, can you help me ask Uncle David? Why didn't Lu Weisha come? You can ask him yourself. Yang Yi encouraged her. But I don't know how to say it. Shishi was a little anxious and tugged at her father's clothes. You can ask Uncle David. Where is Lu Weisha? Yang Yi said the last sentence in Swedish. In fact, Yang Yi had taught Shishi the pronunciation of a similar sentence, but Shishi didn't know how to draw inferences. David heard Yang Yi's words just now. Although he didn't understand the conversation between the father and daughter, he could roughly guess Shishi's intentions. Shishi repeated in a low voice, but she felt that she didn't speak well. Talking to Uncle David wasn't as natural as talking to Lu Weisha. She could say whatever she wanted to her friends, and it didn't matter if she said something wrong. But Shishi didn't have the courage to speak to adults in a language that she wasn't familiar with. Papa, help me. Sisi pouted her small mouth and said with grievance. Lu Weisha is at home. She didn't come with me. David couldn't bear to see the little girl in a difficult position, so he took the initiative to answer. Shishi blinked her big eyes. She didn't understand. David repeated it in English. Shishi's English was better than Swedish, so she understood this time. The little girl lowered her head in disappointment. She thought she could play with her friends. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were also in the coffee shop. I should have brought Lu Weisha here. She also wanted to come out to play, but I didn't know if it was appropriate to bring her out. David apologized to Shishi in English. Looking at the little girl's appearance, David felt that he had done something wrong and made the little girl feel wronged. It's okay. Shishi, come here. Don't disturb your papa. When you go to kindergarten, you and Lu Weisha can still play. Murphy came out at some point. She waved at Shishi and smiled at David. This is my wife Murphy. Yang Yi introduced his wife to David. After chatting for a while, Murphy took the disappointed Shishi back to the booth to play, leaving Yang Yi outside to entertain the guests. After the coffee was brewed, David drank it while it was hot. Just by smelling the aroma of the coffee, he was amazed. After taking a sip, he praised it even more. I saw the coffee that Ding made for the other guests. Although it was not as special as this one, he still put a lot of effort into it. Leon, you were right. Your coffee shop is really good. It's even better than some of the coffee shops in Sweden. David sighed with emotion. Starting from the coffee, Yang Yi and David talked about all kinds of things. Fortunately, Yang Yi was more knowledgeable, so it was not difficult for him to talk about the local conditions and customs of various countries with David. You should come to Sweden to play. Sweden is also a beautiful country. Not only do we have cities, but we also have beautiful forests and seashore. David said to Yang Yi with joy. And Stonehenge. Yang Yi pointed at David, and the two of them laughed. In the end, they still had to talk about the children. Although David was not a qualified stay-at-home dad, it was only because his cooking skills were not qualified. He still put a lot of effort into taking care of the children. I find it strange that as an executive, you have so much time to spend with your children? Yang Yi asked in puzzlement. Actually, managers like us are similar to ordinary employees. We all go to work on time. Unless it's an emergency, I will not spend my time with my family on work. That's not right. Furthermore, it doesn't bring me a lot of income, David explained. It turned out that because of the high tax rate, the actual income of high-income people like him was much lower. It was not much higher than ordinary employees. There was definitely a difference, but it was only a few times. It was not the huge difference between a few thousand yuan a month and a few million yuan a year in China. However, David was willing to endure such a high tax rate. It's normal. The more tax I pay, the more benefits I get. Furthermore, it's also a guarantee for the future of our children and our country. Every country's system was different. It was hard to say which was good and which was bad. Only the one that suited oneself was the best. High tax and high welfare policies were not necessarily suitable for China's national conditions. After all, it was not uncommon to see high welfare policies supporting mediocre people in certain industries. Yang Yi was not interested in politics, but he was more interested in David's way of educating his children. You said that you read with Lu Weisha every night? Yang Yi asked curiously. Yes, at least half an hour. David sighed and said, I've talked to some Chinese employees. They didn't read with their children, which surprised me. You know what? This is a very important moment between parents and children. Please imagine, half an hour before bedtime, the children are like kittens, staying in their parents' arms. Then we read under the warm table lamp together. How warm is that? When they grow up and remember this memory, they will be very happy. David described the scene with a smile. Yang Yi did not deny the happiness of such a scene, but he was just as happy telling Shishi stories. But can they understand those words? Yang Yi frowned and said, Isn't reading a bit beyond the scope of their abilities for children at this age? Take me for example. I always tell Cece stories, and she's always very happy when she hears them. Chapter 606. Children of every age will have books that are suitable for their age. David and Yang Yi talked loudly. He felt that they were only discussing the daily lives of parents and children. He did not know about Yang Yi's various identities, nor did he know what impact these words would have in the future. David spoke with a flushed face as if he had drunk wine. Take Lu Weisha for example. When she was 3 or 4 years old, we would take her to read very simple children's books with colorful illustrations and words. Of course, there were very few of them. Often, there would only be one sentence per page, a few simple words, and then a few pages would form a short story. David could even give Yang Yi an example a bit like, Hello, I'm Li Lei, hello, I'm Han Mimi. A simple greeting conversation could form a short story. That was when she was young. This kind of reading material is not enough to satisfy Lu Weisha. She would go and read some fairy tales. There are more illustrations in them, and the amount of text has increased accordingly. David spread out his hands and smiled. But it doesn't matter, because she can already read a lot of words by herself. You taught her to read in this way? Yang Yi said with a sudden realization. This is only a small part. David pinched his left index finger and thumb together. His expression seemed to be dissatisfied with Yang Yi's slightly utilitarian explanation. He explained, We hoped that she would develop the good habit of reading from a young age. Children nowadays are more and more fond of computer games, but they should also have the hobby of reading. Reading can make people grow, enrich people's knowledge, and enrich people's lives. David's last words touched Yang Yi. He realized that he had indeed neglected this point in the education of Shishi. Indeed, Yang Yi told stories to Shishi, and even drew pictures to enrich the stories, but this still could not replace reading. It was like teaching a man to fish was better than giving him a fish. He told these stories to Shishi like stuffing ducks. It was better to teach her how to discover more beauty in the world through reading. After David finished his coffee, he chatted with Yang Yi for nearly an hour before he took his leave. Although weekends were private time, David wasn't very free. But after David left, Yang Yi's thoughts had just begun. In Beijing, Zhu Jie, who was accompanied by He Chao and his team, squeezed through the swarm of reporters and walked through the entrance of Beijing television station. It had to be said that Zhu Jie was now very ostentatious. Because he was now the big brother of Tianmei Agency, Niu Meiling didn't hide anything. Not only did she arrange 2 agents for Zhu Jie, one was in charge of business contacts, and the other was in charge of public relations. She also arranged the same personnel as Murphy's agency team. Don't think that Murphy only had Mo Xiaowan as her agent. She also had a stylist, makeup assistant, hairstylist assistant, and publicity assistant. If not for Mo Xiaowan being more capable, Murphy would also have a personal assistant. Now Zhu Jie's team had all kinds of assistants. The personal assistants were a man and a woman. The woman was responsible for taking care of Zhu Jie's daily life and chores, while the man was responsible for Zhu Jie's safety, driving him around, and sometimes carrying his suitcase. The media had exposed and attacked this problem before, but Zhu Jie didn't care about others' criticism of him. He was still a little vain. Why couldn't I have some ostentatious extravagance when I was a celebrity? Moreover, his family was rich. It wasn't like he couldn't support this group of people. Fortunately, although Zhu Jie was a little vain, he didn't deliberately put on airs. When he entered the television station, Zhu Jie saw a familiar face. He patted his assistant away and went over to greet her with a smile. "Sister Tsong, you're here for the rankings today too." It was Chao Tsong. Her assistant was pouring some hot water for her to drink. Just now, Chao Tsong was pursuing her personal image in the media's cameras again. She got out of the car with an open coat. It was so cold outside, and her close-fitting long dress inside could almost be said to be a summer dress. She even had a deep V-neck. Although the bottomless cleavage in front of the camera was very attractive, the few minutes of answering the reporters' questions made her unbearably cold. Although there was a heating pad on the inside of the coat, it was useless just now because it was ventilating. Now Chao Tsong was still shivering with the coat wrapped tightly around her. The assistant quickly asked her to drink some hot water to warm her stomach. Seeing Chao Tsong's appearance clearly, Zhu Jie was very gentlemanly and wanted to take off his coat and put it on Chao Tsong. "No need. Thank you, Zhu Jie." Chao Tsong smiled at Zhu Jie. After drinking some hot water, her face looked a little better. She could finally chat with Zhu Jie. "Today is your first day on the rankings, right? I heard that your new song has been very popular as soon as it was released, but you have to be merciful." Chao Tsong was just joking. She was not a strong singer. Her album was basically full of dance songs. Generally, it was difficult for her to get a good ranking in the ranking program. However, idol singers like them only went on the program to get more exposure. Moreover, whether they could get first place or not didn't have much impact on them. As long as they could act cute, dress themselves up beautifully, and keep the hearts of their fans, there would naturally be a large number of fans who would buy her albums, concerts, and even some peripheral products. Of course, Chao Tsong was only looking good on the surface. As an idol singer, only she knew the bitterness. Not to mention these winter days, she had to grit her teeth and wear few clothes. She had to smile in front of her fans. Even the money she earned, a large part of it was exploited by the company. What could she do? Chao Tsong's singing was not good, but her dancing was charming. Without the company's packaging for her, she could not be an idol singer, nor could she compete with thousands of young people who wanted to take the idol route. So, what capital did she have to fight for her own interests? Chao Tsong would not tell Zhu Jie this. Zhu Jie was also joking with Chao Tsong. "No, it's obviously Sister Tsong who is covering for me. Don't always call me Sister Kong. It makes me old." Chao Tsong felt relaxed chatting with Zhu Jie. They talked and laughed. She didn't need to be too vigilant, so she said reproachfully, "Do you think I'm old?" No. You're as beautiful as a flower, youthful and beautiful. Who said you're old? I'll beat him up," Zhu Jie said. The way I call you Sister Tsong has nothing to do with age. It's mainly because you're a senior in the singing industry, and I'm a junior. So it's cordial and respectful to call you that. Still call me Sister Tsong. Chow Tsong Tsong stamped her feet and said angrily. Well, then what should I call you? Zhu Jie asked with a smile. But before Chow Tsong Tsong could answer, the sound of high heels came from behind. A woman who was more beautiful than Chow Tsong Tsong, but also more mature and charming, came over. Chapter 607. Li Man Man, the red flower that appeared on Fast Music, with Murphy who was still a green leaf. She didn't know if it was because her position had changed or because she had gone under the knife, but Li Man Man became sexier and more beautiful after a year. However, what didn't change was her position. A year ago, her popularity were close to the level of a song queen. She could be said to be a crane in a flock of chickens. A year later, she still hadn't made any progress. Li Man Man had always been eager to become a well-deserved song queen instead of a few media outlets that no one was willing to acknowledge. However, in this year, she could only watch with envy and jealousy as Murphy stole all the limelight, while she stayed in the same place and even had some popularity decline. But in any case, Li Man Man was still one of the top stars in the music industry. Walking in the hall of the TV station, her aura suddenly suppressed everyone. Although Li Man Man maintained a charming smile, but a small star like Chow Tsong Tsong still felt the pressure brought by her, and didn't dare to continue to talk to Zhu Jie. Tsong Tsong, come here, I have something to say to you. Li Man Man came over and directly found Chow Tsong Tsong, and said in a very gentle voice. Sister Man, okay. Chow Tsong Tsong and Li Man Man were in the same company, but they rarely interacted. But how could she dare to not listen to her sister's words? Chow Tsong Tsong helplessly shook her head at Zhu Jie, and made an apologetic expression. Li Man Man didn't make it too overbearing. She still smiled at Zhu Jie and said, Zhu Jie, I want to borrow Tsong Tsong for a while. Although he felt a little strange, Zhu Jie didn't care too much. After saying goodbye to them, Zhu Jie followed his agent team, and reported to the program director of New Song Elite List. After a busy period, Zhu Jie returned to the lounge. Xiao Chai, give me the phone. I want to listen to music for a while. It's too boring to wait like this. After closing the door, Zhu Jie comfortably reclined on the sofa with his feet raised high. He didn't have the image of an artist at all. Young Master Jie, here you are. Xiao Chai was Zhu Jie's personal assistant. She quickly handed the phone to Zhu Jie from her bag. Text message. Zhu Jie just turned on the phone and received a text message. It was from Chow Tsong Tsong. She apologized to Zhu Jie for being suddenly pulled away. It's not a big deal. Oh right, you haven't told me what you want me to call you. I'm afraid that if I call you Sister Tsong again, you'll get mad at me. Haha. Zhu Jie replied with a text message. After a while he was listening to music and resting with his eyes closed, Chow Tsong Tsong sent a text message. Zhu Jie opened one eye and glanced at it. It was a short and simple message. Just call me Tsong Tsong. Okay, Tsong Tsong. Zhu Jie replied swiftly. Actually, he was just teasing Chow Tsong Tsong and did not have any strange feelings towards her. Chow Tsong Tsong was similar to some of the beautiful trainees under Tian Mei. She had delicate features and a slim figure, but it was hard to tell how outstanding she was. With Zhu Jie's temperament as a young master, whenever he saw a beautiful woman, except for Li Man Man, who was too mature, he couldn't help but want to flirt with her. Of course, Zhu Jie didn't play with other people's feelings casually. If they were as unrestrained as him, he might play with them for a while. If they were too innocent, Zhu Jie would flirt with them. If the situation was not good, he wouldn't go too deep. He didn't want to tie himself down. There were so many beautiful women in the world. This was also the reason why young Master Jie didn't cause any trouble for himself even though he liked to play with women. However, Chow Tsong Tsong seemed to feel sorry for Zhu Jie. She hesitated for a moment and sent another text message. Actually, Sister Man asked me to come over, because she didn't want me to have too much contact with you. Don't tell others. I think you're a good person and suitable to be friends, so I told you secretly. Of course I won't tell others. But But why didn't Lee Man let you have too much contact with me? Ju Jie was very unhappy, but it wasn't because of Chao Tsong. So he added a silent emoji to Chao Tsong's text message. Because the songs you sang weren't very good. Sister Man was worried that if I talked with you, it would be spread as a scandal by the reporters. Chao Tsong replied. However, Chao Tsong didn't tell Ju Jie the other reason she guessed in her heart. What she said in the text message was only what Lee Man told her. Chao Tsong didn't think that Lee Man would be so kind to care about a small star like her. Chao Tsong guessed that Lee Man did this because she was narrow-minded and wanted to discuss the artists of Tianmei Company. Because Murphy had stolen Lee Man's limelight before, Lee Man had always been dissatisfied with Murphy and her former management company. But Chao Tsong's words made Ju Jie angry with Lee Man. He didn't vent his anger to Chao Tsong in the text message. Instead, he chatted with Chao Tsong for a while. After he put down his phone, he complained to his agent and assistant unhappily. What's wrong with my songs? Tell me, are my songs so bad? Do I need Lee Man to mock me? Of course, Ju Jie also knew that after he sang Mistress, and that night, some mainstream media and even some seniors in the music industry didn't have a good impression of him. But it wasn't to the extent of pushing him to the point of a rat crossing the street. Even under the efforts of Tianmei's public relations, most of the entertainment media now accepted Ju Jie as the little prince of sad love songs who had been hurt by love. Even on the variety show, everyone's ridicule of Ju Jie, or Ju Jie's self-mockery, were all well-intentioned. Everyone was just joking and making the audience happy. Why did Lee Man dislike him, as if he was the plague? If Chao Tsong hadn't told him, Ju Jie still had a good impression of Lee Man. It doesn't matter, young Master Jie. We don't need to pay attention to this kind of person. Lee Man isn't a good person either. Agent De Jong and Ju Jie had a common enemy and said flatteringly. In the early years, she had a scandal with some male singers and actors. I don't know if it's true or not, but she also relied on hype to get to the top. Xiao Chai asked curiously, but hasn't Lee Man's image changed for the better now? She also admitted her relationship with Do Zun. It's said that the two are preparing to get married. Lee Man and Do Zun are both in the same agency. Moreover, Lee Man was once rumored to be the mistress of their company's financier. Although it was later denied, it's still unclear. She has been involved in so many scandals for so many years. Suddenly, she was in a relationship with Do Zun, a guy who was also involved in scandals, and got married. Can you believe it? De Jong laughed and said. Listening to their discussion, Ju Jie became interested. He patted his head and said with a smile. Now that you mention this, I also remember. My aunt and manager Jian analyzed that the combination of Lee Man and Do Zun may be a hype. The hype that Ju Jie was talking about was the hype with Murphy and Yang Yi, the loving couple. After Murphy and Yang Yi got together, not only did their career not decline, but it also had the effect of 1 + 1 > 2. Many people praised them as a model couple, and a clear stream in the entertainment circle. It wasn't the first time that Yang Yi and Murphy were being followed. In the middle of the year, Yang Yi and Murphy sang military songs. Unexpectedly, the 4 military songs that Yang Yi wrote not only weren't criticized because of the outdated military songs, but also made the military songs popular. So later, many artists imitated them and also found songwriters to write military songs. They took advantage of the popularity and released them. But none of these hastily recorded military songs could become popular. They were even scolded by some military fans. Obviously, there was a risk in following the trend. Yang Yi and Murphy were followed in many places, but none of them were as bold as Lee Man. She found a male artist and directly pretended to be in a relationship. They showed their affection in front of the camera and openly announced their marriage. This was definitely a dangerous move. If it went wrong, she was afraid that she would be scolded to death. But Lee Man didn't care about the consequences. She wanted to be a female artist at the top of the music circle. At least for now, her and Do Zun's coupling was performing well. Her fans found it difficult to accept at first, but over the years, her scandals had made her fans have some psychological tolerance. Seeing Lee Man's happy appearance in the camera, the silly fans chose to bless her. After all, Lee Man Man was not young anymore. In addition, the model couple Yang Yi and Murphy had not appeared in front of the public for a long time. Lee Man Man and Do Zoon could be regarded as a supplement. Many passers-by who believed in true love began to join Lee Man Man's camp. Taking advantage of her rising popularity, Lee Man Man also released her new album. However, a fake was a fake after all. Ju Jia looked down on Lee Man Man. Young Master Jia, in tonight's chart, your song was ranked after Lee Man Man's. Xiao Chai suddenly opened his notebook and said to Ju Jia. Ju Jia's eyes lit up and he laughed. Chapter 608. Lee Man Man's singing was pretty good. She sang the song Dear, I Miss You affectionately. Do Zoon seemed to surprise her when he suddenly appeared under the stage and shook Lee Man Man's support card like an ordinary fan. This scene was captured by the live camera. Lee Man Man's surprised and moved expression pushed the atmosphere of the scene to a climax. Some fans couldn't help but be moved to tears by their small interactions. It had to be said that many people still yearned for a better life. Under the situation where they didn't know the truth, this kind of loving action also received their heartfelt praise and blessings. After Lee Man Man finished singing, she reluctantly waved her hand to the audience and slowly walked back to the backstage. In the place where the stage lights couldn't reach, Lee Man Man restrained her pure appearance and proudly walked through the corridor of the stage with her chest out. Just then she walked face to face with Ju Jia. Of course, Lee Man Man didn't speak bluntly to Ju Jia. She still smiled slightly and nodded to Ju Jia. But she didn't say anything. Tonight, Ju Jia was also a strong competitor for her. Lee Man Man didn't think that Ju Jia had any value for her to climb up to, so she just nodded her head. Ju Jia curled his lips and didn't pay attention to her anymore. He cleared his throat and let Xiao Chai tidy up his headset. Young Master Jia, come on. Xiao Chai whispered. Xiao Chai was still a rookie who had just graduated more than a year ago, but she was quite beautiful. Ju Jia smiled and touched her head, then walked out slowly. Let's welcome Ju Jia with a round of applause. Today he will give us the first performance of the most talked about new song, Impulsive Punishment, in November. The host introduced Ju Jia's performance passionately and powerfully. The music chart show was different from other variety shows. It didn't have complicated interaction between the host and the singer. All the singers had to rely on their strength to conquer the audience, so there was nothing to say. One word, sing. After the host went down, only Ju Jia was left on the stage. Without waiting for the audience to cheer again, the prelude of Impulsive Punishment faintly sounded like the melodious music coming from the empty valley of the western region. What kind of music is this? It's so good. Just listening to the prelude, many of the audience couldn't help but perk up their ears. The melodious and clear music at the beginning gave people a refreshing feeling. The melancholy melody immediately captured people's hearts. It was as if every strum of the zither was tugged on people's hearts. Ju Jia stood on the stage with a sad expression. He looked up at the ceiling of the stage at a 45-degree angle, as if it was a starry sky. Finally, he raised the microphone and began to sing. That night, I was drunk. I held your hand and talked nonsense. As he sang, his slightly hoarse voice immediately outlined the image of a heartbroken and haggard man. To be honest, Ju Jia's singing couldn't be compared to the legendary Dao Lang from Yang Yi's previous life. Dao Lang's unique voice had been baptized by years of wind and frost, which made it intoxicating. It was hoarse and ethereal, as if it had traveled through time and space. As for Ju Jia's hoarse voice, it was completely because he had lowered his voice to sing it. Of course, in order to sing this song well, Ju Jia had consulted many teachers and practiced for several months before he could sing this hoarse voice without too many flaws. Of course, no one in this world sang like this. After all, not all hoarse voices were pleasant to listen to. Many original hoarse voices were caused by smoking too much. Not to mention singing, just listening to it made people feel uncomfortable. It was precisely because Ju Jia was considered unconventional that his hoarse singing was amazing. It was similar to listening to Dao Lang's singing, in a situation where there was no comparison. However, in front of the TV, many of Jujie's fans were excited and couldn't help but smile. It was really Jujie. Looking at his lyrics, he was drunk again. That night was also a drunken mess. It could be seen that this guy drank a lot and caused a lot of trouble because of drinking. Of course, to be able to write about such emotional pain, he could be considered an infatuated man, right? Only caring about your own heart, suppressing your thoughts, wildly expressing them. However, as they listened, everyone could still hear the difference between this song and That Night. Whether it was the arrangement or the lyrics, Punishment of Impulsiveness was much better than That Night. If That Night could still be criticized for its weak lyrics, using too many modal particles and repetitive parallelism, then Punishment of Impulsiveness seemed to be upgraded by several levels. Listening to its lyrics, although they were more straightforward, from time to time, there were neat sentences and rhyming endings, making people feel that it was as beautiful as a poem. Of course, a song was just a song, not a poem. Everyone was more concerned about whether it was sung well or not. My intoxicated eyes could no longer see your expression clearly, and I forgot how you would react at that time. When I held your hand and placed it in my palm, I mistakenly felt that you weren't angry, so I thought that you would understand my good intentions. Jujie really spent a lot of time practicing this song, so that he could sing the first few high notes of each line so freely. One had to know that in the beginning, when he sang the high notes, his voice would still break. But what the audience was hearing now was a version that was already sung well. Jujie was on stage, holding the microphone with both hands, looking at the sky, and singing with his eyes closed. It was as if every high note was a sad cry. The male fans listened with relish, and the female fans were even more mesmerized. The softness in their hearts was poked by Jujie. After a series of narrations, the song finally ushered in its first climax. It was as if the style of the song had suddenly changed, and it suddenly entered the rhythm of a rock song. With the sound of a few drums, Jujie raised his voice and sang like a roar. If you didn't know how many glasses I drank that day, you wouldn't understand how beautiful you are. I wouldn't believe that the first time I saw you, I fell in love with you so straightforwardly. Jujie sang this part very hard, but it couldn't be helped. This was a very difficult part to sing. If he didn't sing with all his might, he wouldn't be able to sing that heart-wrenching feeling. But the audience below the stage was already mesmerized by the song. The lyrics here were too beautiful, especially the line, "You wouldn't understand how beautiful you are." The lyrics wanted to express the protagonist confessing to his sweetheart after getting drunk, but the lyrics didn't directly describe the content of the confession. Instead, they used a negative question to reflect the protagonist's anxiousness to express his admiration for the other party. He used random words to describe the other party as beautiful as a fairy. This cute clumsiness was vividly displayed. But I believe the feeling in my heart, it came so fast and so directly. Even if my heart is wild and can't extinguish the fire, I still believe that God let you and me meet. It was still a high-pitched voice. Without Dowlang's level, Jujie could only hold on. Looking at the way the veins on his neck bulged, people were a little worried that he would suddenly break his voice. Fortunately, Jujie sang very well this time, and held on until the end. And this struggling appearance aroused the sympathy of many fans, who said that this song was as vulgar as That Night and Mistress. It was obviously raised by several levels, okay? Such a good song, such a hard singing, such a touching melody, such lyrics, why not vote for it? The fans at the scene were swaying excitedly for Jujie, and many people in front of the TV couldn't help but pick up their mobile phones and send text messages to Jujie to vote for him. Yes, before Jujie went on stage, many fans still thought that Lee Man-man's Dear, I Miss You was very good, but it had to be said that a sad love song was more emotional than a sweet love song. It could touch other people's emotions and arouse others' resonance. If it wasn't for God letting fate play tricks on me, I wouldn't be so heartbroken when I think of you. I'll forget you, I should forget you. This is the best punishment for impulsiveness. The song came to an end, and the lonely figure on the stage looked so pitiful. But think about it, in this world, how many people have not been hurt by love? As Jujie sang, it was God letting fate play tricks on me. He was also a pitiful person who was played by God. How could they not vote for him? Whether it was in front of the TV or at the scene, punishment of impulsiveness had been interpreted to the extreme. After Ju Jie finished singing, the audience stood up and applauded him. Perhaps there was a lot of sympathy. And this scene, through the TV screen, fell into the eyes of Lee Man-man in the lounge. Lee Man-man's face had become gloomy. In the face of this song, an absolutely high-quality song, Lee Man-man's original confidence was defeated and couldn't be found. How could it be like this? Last year, when she released her new album, she encountered Murphy, who came out of nowhere. This year, she finally ushered in the opportunity to become a god, and sacrificed so much to put on a good show. In the end, she met this annoying Ju Jie. Damn, Tianmei, you're cutting off my way out. In a shopping mall in Jiangcheng, Yang Yi stood in front of the TV store, and just happened to see the scene of Ju Jie winning the weekly champion of Beijing TV's new song Elite List, with punishment of impulsiveness, and then holding the trophy. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up slightly. This feeling was still good, as if he had achieved a small achievement in a nurturing game. Papa, let's go. Cece's voice brought Yang Yi back to his senses as she exerted force on his hand. Yang Yi lowered his head and saw the little girl pouting her small mouth. He stood for too long, and she couldn't wait any longer. Well, let's go. Today's task is to buy books for you. Dad didn't forget. Yang Yi smiled and picked up the little girl and strode forward. Chapter 609. Lu Weisha's father was right. A child's childhood should not only be accompanied by toys and TV sets, but also by books with words and illustrations. Yang Yi also wanted to cultivate Xishi's interest in reading. Therefore, after dinner, Yang Yi took Xishi out to buy children's books. Because Murphy was at home, Yang Yi was worried. He did not take Xishi to the Haihong Children's Mall in the Binhai district. Instead, he chose a nearby mall, which had the largest bookstore in Tingshan district. Naturally, there would also be a section for children's books. Papa, can I get down and walk by myself? After Yang Yi picked up the little girl for a while, she felt that shopping in her father's arms was not enjoyable enough, so she struggled to get down. Then you can't run around. There are adults here. If you are not careful, you will be knocked down. Yang Yi had to put Xishi down and warned her. Watching his daughter grow up day by day, there were good and bad things. Now she was no longer infatuated with her father's arms. However, it seemed that there was nothing bad about it. Xishi seemed to gradually become less naughty. After listening to her father's threat, she really did not run around. She even put her little hand into her father's big hand. Papa, I want you to hold me. Xishi did not know what she was happy about. She looked up and said to her father with a smile. Her sweet voice still had a strong dependence on her father. Yang Yi held Xishi's little hand with a knitted glove. Looking at the little girl's beautiful smiling eyes, his mood suddenly became cheerful. They came to the children's book section of the bookstore. There was a dazzling array of books, as well as colorful patterns on the covers, which immediately dazzled Xishi. The little girl looked left and right, forgetting to move. Xishi, come and see what this is. Yang Yi saw some familiar faces in the bestseller section. He chuckled, raised his eyebrows at Cici and said, Don't worry. The little girl was still in a state of extreme distraction. She looked at other beautiful patterns and moved unsteadily to her father's side. This little muddle-headed girl gave people the feeling that she was defenseless. Perhaps anyone who saw her could not help but want to take her away. Look at this, what is it? Yang Yi smiled, took a fairy tale book from the bookshelf, and shook it at Xi. What is it? She looked at her father with her big eyes, very puzzled. Look at this. Do you recognize the words on it? Yang Yi pointed at the title of the book and said to Xi. She finally recovered and concentrated on looking at the cover. Immediately, the little girl raised her head in surprise. Her gloved little hand was still pressing the two words Xishi on the cover, and she said to her father, Papa, this is my name. But soon the little girl had self-doubt again. No, my name is Yang Shi. These two characters are Xi, Yang Yi said with a smile. It's also my name. She finally made the final judgment. She looked up at her father with some surprise. as if it was her turn to tell her discovery. Papa, this is my name. Yes. Because this is the book that Papa wrote for you. Look at the pictures on it. Don't they look familiar? Yang Yi smiled, pointing to the cartoon characters interspersed on the cover and said, "This is Pinocchio, this is Sid, this is Elephant, the woolly elephant." At this time, the little girl finally recognized them, and she said happily, "Yes, these are the stories that Papa told you, a collection of stories. This is called Shishi's Bedtime Story 2, and then here is Shishi's Bedtime Story, the first one, and Journey to the West." Yang Yi picked up a few books and said to Shishi, "So many books." The little girl looked at her father with a smile. She still couldn't understand the meaning of these, but Shishi was still very happy. Lu Weisha's father said that when he returns to Sweden on vacation, he will bring you the storybooks of their country. Yang Yi said with a smile, "So let's also buy some storybooks written by Papa and give them to Lu Weisha in a few days, okay?" There was a problem. These storybooks that Yang Yi gave were all in Chinese. Lu Weisha and her father definitely couldn't understand them, so they could only give them to each other as cultural gifts. Of course, Yang Yi was inspired by the sale of the copyright of Prison Break abroad, and he also personally translated his own works. The most important ones were Shishi's Bedtime Story, but the main purpose was to be used by the film and television manufacturers in the United States, so they hadn't been released on the market yet. It was also convenient to make them into physical books. Yang Yi asked Lu Benji to arrange that after these fairy tales were sold in the United States, he could also send 2 more to Lu Weisha. Of course, this might take a long time. However, Yang Yi still preferred to send Chinese books. After all, the other party also sent books in their mother tongue, so he had to have some cultural confidence. Lu Weisha couldn't understand it, but she could slowly learn some Chinese. "Okay. Papa, is this a gift?" Shishi didn't think so much. The little girl smiled happily and even asked a question. "Yes, Lu Weisha's father gave us a gift, so we also have to give them some gifts in return." Yang Yi smiled at Shishi and said. After throwing a few books in the shopping basket, Yang Yi still got down to business. He looked for children's books that he or Murphy could read with Shishi before going to bed at night. However, after going through the bestseller bookshelf, Yang Yi frowned slightly. The books here weren't suitable for Shishi to read. It wasn't that the stories were bad, as Yang Yi hadn't carefully read the content of the stories. It was that they were similar to the stories that he wrote, and were more inclined to use words to narrate. It was densely printed with small characters and gorgeous words. Obviously, it was not a book that Cece could understand at her age. If he really wanted to read them, he had to wait until Shishi was at least 8 or 9 years old, when she was more literate. After going through several counters, Yang Yi finally found a counter. The books on the counter were like comics, and there were more illustrations. What was more interesting was that there were many children who came to the mall with their parents, and they were flipping through the books with relish. There were big and small children. The younger ones were 6 or 7 years old, like primary school students, and the older ones were in their early teens. Each of them was holding a children's book, standing in front of the bookshelf, sitting cross-legged on the ground, or sitting with half of their buttocks squeezed on the edge of the bookshelf. They were very engrossed in reading. Yang Yi walked past them with Shishi, but they didn't raise their heads, as if they didn't notice. Shishi looked at these little brothers and sisters curiously, and there was a trace of yearning in her eyes. He didn't know if she found reading interesting, or if she simply wanted to follow the crowd, but this atmosphere really made the little girl have a desire to read like them. However, compared to the other bookshelves, the front of this bookshelf was a bit crowded. The little girl carefully followed behind her father, and she was afraid that she would accidentally step on others. Yang Yi put the shopping basket on a high place, randomly picked 2 books, and casually asked Shishi, "Which ones do you want to read?" In this environment, Shishi couldn't help but stick close to her father. After hearing her father's question, she raised her small head and looked at her father with some confusion in her eyes. "I don't know," the little girl whispered. She whispered so softly because she was also afraid of disturbing the little brothers and sisters who were reading seriously. It seemed that reading was really a very sacred thing. Chapter 6:10. You can open these books yourself and see if there's anything you like. Daddy will buy it for you, Yang Yi said with a smile. He was worried that his daughter would be bored and not know what to do at the bookstore. Looking for books to read in the bookstore was also a great pleasure. Shishi nodded in confusion. She turned her head and focused her attention on the bookshelf. The children's books seemed to attract the little girl's attention like the wonderful pictures from before. However, Yang Yi saw Shishi look left and right, and finally reach for the large picture album. The little girl ignored the small and thicker children's books. Perhaps it was because the colors of the large books were brighter, and the pictures looked richer? He saw the little girl holding a large picture album tightly with both hands, as if she was holding a bowl. The book was as big as her face. It was placed on the edge of the bookshelf, and she was a little worried that it would fall off. At first, she was at a loss. But after glancing at the little brother beside her, the little girl flipped it open. However, she was wearing gloves, and her fingers were a little clumsy. She directly flipped to the middle of the picture album. Yang Yi squatted down and helped Shishi hold the book. Then he said in amusement, "Come, Daddy will help you take off your gloves. How can you read with gloves on?" But I'm afraid of the cold." Shishi stretched out her two small hands, but still said to her father worriedly, "Don't be afraid. It's not cold here." Yang Yi took off Shishi's two small gloves, then held her two small hands in the palm of his hand. He blew a breath of hot air and said with a smile, "Look, it's not cold now, right?" "Aya." The little girl's eyebrows immediately loosened, and she giggled. Letting her read by herself, Yang Yi also flipped through the children's books. However, after a while, Yang Yi also found some problems. Most of these children's books were comic books. Although there were few words and a few pictures formed a short story, its plot was not suitable for Shishi to read. For example, this comic book described a school joke. A child said to his deskmate, "Why are you eating French fries again?" The second picture said, "What I hate the most is people who worship foreign things." As for the third picture, his deskmate asked him speechlessly, "You still have the nerve to tell me what's in that box on your table?" In the manga, there was also a large box of chips on the main character's table. It was exactly the same as the box of chips on his table. In the end, in the fourth picture, the protagonist smiled wickedly. "Who said that? This is clearly a fried dough stick." In the manga, when the box was opened, there were fried dough sticks stacked together like French fries. It wasn't that it wasn't beautiful, but the problem was that Yang Yi couldn't help but chuckle. He found it very interesting. The stories and jokes in these children's books were not only for children, but for adults as well. Of course, Yang Yi didn't mind letting Shishi read this story alone. However, when he flipped through the other stories, Yang Yi saw that the author used some jokes about excrement and urine, used some topics of love between young men and women, and even used jokes like asterisk asterisk, lipstick and bras. To make a comparison, these children's books were like Crayon Shin-chan. They were more like adult comics. Although Crayon Shin-chan had lost a lot of sexual content in the later stages, the content was still more adult-oriented. So, how could this be called a children's comic? It was obviously not suitable for children like Shishi, who had yet to start school, to read it. Yang Yi didn't want Shishi to come into contact with these adult ways of thinking at such a young age. What made Yang Yi feel that the problem was very serious was that this type of comic wasn't a special case. Most of the comics in the children's book section were similar to it. Yang Yi recalled that Fu Jun had shown him a newspaper column by a director of the Guangdong Province's Writers Association named Yu Qian. Although Fu Jun showed it to him because Yu Qian recommended his first book, Shishi's Bedtime Stories, which sold out his books in Guangdong Province, Yang Yi still remembered Yu Qian's comments on children's literature in the article. She said that the children's literature in China had gone into a wrong direction. Many writers who wrote children's literature used adult thinking to conceptualize. The stories they wrote weren't suitable for children. Yu Qian was also a mother. As a writer, she had always encouraged her children to read. However, in her eyes, only Shishi's Bedtime Stories, written by Yang Yi, was suitable for children to read. Not only was the story full of imagination, but it also didn't deliberately use flowery words. Yang Yi finally understood Yu Qian's feelings when he brought Shishi out to buy books. After looking around, Yang Yi only found a few children's books that were passable. One was called The Adventures of Little Fish. It described a small sea fish. After it was born, it began its adventure in the sea. There wasn't a particularly thrilling plot. Instead, it was a bit like a popular science book, allowing children to understand the world of the sea through beautiful illustrations. There was also a book called The Clown Pug. It was a bit like the story of the ugly duckling. The clown pug was despised by the other pets in the family. God knew why this family had so many pets. There was a cold cat, a fierce dog, an arrogant parrot, a naughty squirrel, a gluttonous pig, and an old lizard that could talk. However, unlike the ugly duckling, the clown pug didn't become prettier. It faced its dog life very positively and bravely faced challenges. It gained the friendship of the other pets in the family through its stories. Wait, there were a total of 4 books. These children's books were passable, and they were all large volumes with colorful illustrations. Although they were a little expensive, the little girl liked them very much when she saw them when Yang Yi gave them to Shishi. However, the problem was that there were hundreds of children's books in the bookcase, and Yang Yi only found less than 4 books that were suitable for Shishi. No, in the end he still bought 5 books. Because Shishi had bravely explored by herself and found the books she liked. I want this. The little girl held a book the size of 20 carats and looked at her father with eyes full of hope. It was just like how she couldn't move her feet when she saw a beautiful doll, and wanted her father to buy it for her. Yang Yi took a look. This wasn't a storybook, but a popular science children's book with many cartoon illustrations that introduced the animals and plants in the forest. You like this? Yang Yi asked, a little surprised. There are little rabbits and little mushrooms in it. Shishi nodded and said seriously to her father. It turned out that she also looked at the pictures in the book. For Shishi, she couldn't understand the stories described in those books. On the contrary, the more beautiful and colorful the pictures were, the more she liked them. Of course, Yang Yi was still willing to buy popular science books for Shishi. On the way home, Shishi was very happy. Sometimes, she would sing the children's songs that she learned in kindergarten to her father, and sometimes she would talk to him excitedly. It was as if going out to the bookstore was just like going out to buy a bunch of dolls. It was so fun. However, Yang Yi wasn't as happy as Shishi. From this shopping trip, he deeply understood the seriousness of the children's book problem described by Yu Qian. Although he didn't have the leisure to worry about the country and the people, he still had to consider what his daughter would read after reading these books. Even if Shishi grew up and had other books to read, what about his and Murphy's second child in the future? Yang Yi couldn't avoid these problems. Of course, Yang Yi could write his own books, but how many books could he write that were suitable for children? Yang Yi was almost drained of inspiration by Shishi. In his previous life he didn't read many children's stories. Most of them were made up by him according to the settings of some fairy tales that he knew. If he continued to make up nonsense, the things that he wrote would be like those children's books, with a lot of adult thinking patterns. What's more, there was a limit to what he could achieve with his own efforts. What should Yang Yi do? Chapter 6:11. Mom, let me tell you. There were so many people in the bookstore, and they were all sitting on the ground reading, but, I felt that the ground was dirty. As soon as she came back, she couldn't wait to tell her mother about what she saw in the bookstore. Everything seemed to be very novel, whether it was those strange patterns or those little brothers and sisters reading books. For Shishi, it was all knowledge that was worth sharing with her mother. Murphy listened patiently, and then said with a smile, "Show Mom, what books did you buy?" Now that Murphy was 9 months pregnant, she was only one step away from giving birth. Her belly was getting bigger and bigger, and she felt a little uncomfortable sitting down. Occasionally, she would have to get up and walk, but she couldn't walk for too long, because the heavy burden would aggravate the soreness of her waist and legs. Not only that, if the belly was too big, it would easily cause the stomach to be full, so Murphy couldn't eat too much at one time. In order to ensure adequate nutrition, she had to eat many times like a baby. Therefore, after coming back, Yang Yi went to the kitchen to cook some fresh and delicious porridge for Murphy. Hearing that her mother wanted to see the books she bought, the little girl was full of energy. She turned around and ran to the shoe cabinet, tiptoed, and took the bag that her father put on top of it. Then she ran over and smiled happily. Mom, look, these are the books I bought with Papa. Murphy took out the books and looked through them one by one. She climbed onto the sofa and knelt on the side excitedly. She supported herself with one hand and stretched out the other hand, pointing at the books in her mother's hand and said, Mom, this is the book I like to read, and this is the one Papa bought, and these two are my names. Papa said that he wanted to give them to Lu Weisha. Mom knows, these two are stories written by your Papa. They are very good, but I don't know if Lu Weisha can understand Chinese. Murphy couldn't help but laugh. The mother and daughter were chatting in the living room. Yang Yi was cooking porridge for Murphy in the kitchen. However, he received a call from Yang Qing in the middle. For Yang Yi to call so late at night, it wasn't bad news. Instead, it was good news that Yang Yi had been looking forward to for a long time. Yang Chonggui had finally agreed to stay in Jiang City for a period of time. In fact, Yang Yi had always wanted to bring the two elders to the city to enjoy life. However, Yang Chonggui was unwilling to leave the mountain. Even when Yang Huan was admitted to university, he did not send her to school. Although the old man said that he didn't want to leave his hometown because he was old, Yang Yi could vaguely guess his father's thoughts. He was probably worried that his identity would be exposed if he went to the city, which would bring trouble to his family. But how could that be? It had been decades since the incident. Not to mention that the country was as safe as a watertight iron bucket. Those enemies abroad were probably dead or too old to walk. Why would they come all the way to China to look for him? Besides, who would know that Yang Chonggui would come to Jiang City? Who would have known that this white-haired old man was the great demon who had stirred up trouble in the Japanese's territory back in the day? However, Yang Yi couldn't do anything if Yang Chonggui didn't want to come. If the old man didn't want to come, his mother wouldn't come either. Dong Yue said, If I go to the city, who will take care of him? This lasted for more than half a year. Finally, with the excuse that the second grandson or granddaughter was about to be born, Yang Yi finally got Yang Chonggui to agree. The day before yesterday, Yang Yi called Yang Chonggui and said, Don't you want to hug your grandson who is about to be born? Since Yang Chonggui agreed to come, Dong Yue would naturally follow. However, Yang Yi wasn't sure how long they could stay in the city. Yang Yi called to tell Yang Yi that the old man had changed his mind. They will probably arrive the day after tomorrow. I have to go to the county to buy train tickets for Dad and Mom. Yang Qing said to Yang Yi. No, buy 4 train tickets. I don't feel at ease if they come by themselves. You and Shuyi can also come here to play and see Huan's school. Yang Yi said without any explanation. Although Yang Chonggui had roamed the world in his early years and had experience in roaming the world, after all, the times were different. Yang Chonggui's experience might not be useful in the complicated modern society. It just so happened that it was winter now and not the busy time for farming. Yang Yi simply let his family gather in the city. At night, Murphy went to bed early. Yang Yi first massaged her legs and waist to relieve her body's soreness. It could also relieve Murphy's anxiety, due to her big belly and restlessness. However, Murphy was still a little flustered because she knew that her mother-in-law and father-in-law were coming. When Yang Yi massaged her, she couldn't help but say, Dad and Mom are coming. We have to tidy up. I saw it yesterday and it seems that the room is empty. It doesn't look good. You have to add some household appliances. We also have to buy clothes for Dad and Mom. Dad likes to drink tea. The tea at home isn't good enough. Do you want to buy some? Yang Qing and his wife also want to. Sigh, I can't help Mom cook now. I don't know if Mom will blame me. Murphy was still nervous like a new daughter-in-law. Yang Yi could only interrupt her and smile. All right, they're just coming over to play. Don't be so nervous. Besides, you're pregnant now. You're the most important person in the world. When Mom comes, how can she bear to let you do the work? That's true, but they're elders after all. Murphy revealed a trace of a smile. After the massage, he let Murphy rest by herself. Yang Yi went next door to accompany his daughter. Although her father didn't tell her a story before going to bed, and instead read with Shishi, the little girl still had a lot of interest. She climbed into bed early and held a book while waiting for her father. What are you reading today? The Adventures of Xiaoyu? Or The Clown Pug? Yang Yi couldn't help but smile when he saw the little girl spread out the 5 books on the bed, as if she was setting up a stall. Look at this puppy. She hesitated for a while before finally choosing The Clown Pug. Yang Yi lifted the blanket and sat on the bed. He picked up a pillow and placed it behind him. The little girl, who was wearing pajamas, quickly climbed over. She mischievously turned around on the bed and pressed down on the blanket. Then she lifted her small and delicate feet and looked at her father with a smile in her big eyes. It seemed that if her father didn't scold her, she wouldn't obediently crawl into the blanket. Come sit here. You can't lie down and read. Yang Yi patted the spot beside him. She still wanted to read. She had no choice but to roll over and sit next to her father obediently. Yang Yi reached out to pull the blanket over and covered his and Shishi's legs. The little girl leaned back and snuggled into her father's arms. She found a comfortable position, and even pulled one of her father's big hands over, so that he could hold her. This feeling was very warm and gave her a special sense of security. Shishi felt that it was much more interesting than lying on the bed and listening to her father tell her a story. Come, let's read together. Let's start from the first page. Yang Yi opened The Clown Pug and slightly placed it on his lap. Papa, I don't think pugs look as good as buns. Looking at the pug that had just arrived at home on the first page, the little girl twisted in her father's arms and turned to say to him, because they're different breeds, they look different too. However, it's also because it doesn't look good that everyone calls it a clown. It's not a clown that can perform magic, it's a clown. Yang Yi explained. However, you can't call it an ugly clown, nor can you call other puppies or people ugly. Because you'll make others sad. This little pug was made to cry by everyone's words. Look. That's not right. The little girl seemed to understand. She nodded her little head and followed her father's words. That's right. Yang Yi smiled with relief. He even gently stroked Cece's soft long hair with his left hand. The words on it say, Master brought home a new pet pug, but the pug wasn't welcomed. The parrot flew over and said that you're ugly, you're ugly. Cece's face turned red. The clown is so pitiful. The little girl stopped twisting around. Her eyes were glued to the book as she muttered worriedly. The first page was that simple, and the second page was about the same. The next few pages were all about how the little pug was ridiculed by its friends, and ended up being called a clown. Yang Yi took Shishi to read slowly. He also introduced the animals in the book to her, and told her about their common knowledge. For example, the parrot with colorful feathers could imitate human speech, the squirrel with a big tail liked to eat nuts, and so on. Yang Yi seemed to have said more about the content outside the book. However, Shishi still listened with great interest. She even asked her father questions from time to time, just like how Yang Yi used to tell her stories. After reading for more than half an hour, she had only read 7 or 8 pages. However, the little girl was so sleepy that her eyelids started to droop. Of course, if Yang Yi didn't stop her, Shishi would still see herself falling asleep because she was already addicted to the story of the clown. Go to sleep. Let's continue reading tomorrow night, okay? Yang Yi said softly as he gently lifted the little girl who was beginning to doze off, and laid her down on the bed. Shishi lay on the pillow and closed her eyes. Her long eyelashes covered her eyes. Hearing her father's words, she was in a daze and almost subconsciously muttered, go to sleep. Yang Yi kissed the little girl's forehead and turned off the room light. Chapter 6:12. In the small building at the back of Jiangchuan, Yang Huan was staring at the computer screen and biting the end of his pen with a frown. Although he was watching a movie, Yang Huan was here with the mission of writing a short biography of a character. In order to figure out the psychology of the character and write the background story of the character, Yang Huan not only had to watch the movie over and over again, sometimes he even had to play the movie frame by frame, so that he could see if the other party was cheating. No, he meant to see the changes in the character's expression. Obviously, this was not enjoyment but torture. However, just like what the teacher said about her in the acting class, she had a good foundation. She might be lucky enough to play 1 or 2 roles, but her acting skills were mediocre. If she did not work hard to improve herself and become more well-rounded, even if she had a good starting point, she would not be able to make much progress in her life. Therefore, Yang Huan had to seize every opportunity to learn how to write a biography. She had to understand the psychological changes of the characters, so that she could understand why the actors acted the way they did in the movie, and how she would behave in front of the camera. Of course, Yang Huan was not convinced at the beginning. However, Ding Xiang told her that although Guizi did not attend any classes in the film academy, he practiced harder than anyone else in private. He practiced more comprehensively than anyone else because he would shamelessly ask the students of the film academy for advice and learn all the methods of others. Otherwise, how could Guizi have played the important supporting role of Officer Du Jiang in The Fugitive so well? If the chubby boy could work so hard, Sister Huan would be laughed at by the boys if she fell behind. Therefore, Yang Huan began to work hard. However, it seemed that tonight was not a good time to study. Yang Yi had called her earlier to tell her that his parents were coming. Now that she had finally calmed down, Ding Xiang knocked on her door happily and said, "Huan Huan, there is an audition in Jiangcheng. Do you want to go?" Did Ding Xiang look like an agent? Yes, in addition to being a student and a waitress in a coffee shop, she now had a third identity, Yang Huan and Guizi's intern agent. Since Yang Huan and Guizi were still studying, this job did not require a lot of work. Mo Shaowan occasionally gave her some guidance and taught her what to do as an agent. Ding Xiang could understand and adapt in advance. Once she graduated, she would be able to work in the company directly. However, Ding Xiang did not slack off. Every night, after she finished her homework, she would actively help Yang Huan and Guizi find opportunities to film and train themselves. For example, Guizi would be going to Shanghai for an audition the day after tomorrow. That was the unexpected reward Ding Xiang got after she sent out Guizi's resume. Because Guizi was fat, there weren't many suitable roles for him. Good and important roles were even rarer. Now there was a big production comedy movie called The Fat Agent that was willing to give him an audition for the lead role. It was uncertain whether he would be selected, but Guizi certainly couldn't miss such an opportunity. He said that he would go even if he had to skip class. When he heard the news, Guizi was so happy that he picked up the skinny Ding Xiang and almost kissed her when she blushed and wanted to beat him up. However, compared to Guizi, there were fewer opportunities. She had to seize every opportunity that came her way. Yang Huan had a good image and knew martial arts. If she wanted to film, she would have plenty of opportunities. However, Ding Xiang did not send out Yang Huan's resume because Yang Huan's studies were more important. She could not let filming affect her classes and foundation. This time, however, Ding Xiang felt that Yang Huan was suitable for the role. In fact, she needed to fight for it. "What role is the audition for?" Yang Huan asked Ding Xiang curiously. It was very convenient to audition in River Town. It's Brother Yang's book Drawing Sword. Li Yunlong's first wife, Xiu Qin. Director Chen Fengchen is already preparing to film this TV series in River Town. Ding Xiang said to Yang Huan, "Although this character won't have many scenes and will die after a few episodes, I think this character will leave a deep impression. If played well, it will be very outstanding." Ding Xiang had read Yang Yi's book. To be honest, Xiu Qin was her favorite character in Drawing Sword. "Did my brother tell you this?" Yang Huan asked in surprise. "Didn't he say that he won't be able to help me on the path of acting?" "Brother Yang didn't say that. I got the news from someone else. You know that I joined some cameo groups that recruit actors," Ding Xiang said in embarrassment. Ding Xiang was a little embarrassed as she continued. "Everyone in Rivertown is talking about this. I tried to submit your resume, but I didn't expect to receive a reply." "Wait, are you sure my brother doesn't know?" Yang Huan asked curiously. "He shouldn't know because your resume doesn't mention your relationships." Ding Xiang looked at Yang Huan in confusion, not knowing why she cared about that. "Then let's give it a try. Don't tell my brother. If I can get this role." Hee. Yang Huan smiled proudly, as if she could already see the scene of her showing off. However, she restrained herself after a while. She coughed twice and said, If you can't get it, don't tell him. I don't want my brother to ridicule me. Ding Xiang frowned. She was very quick-witted and immediately thought of some flaws in the plan. She said, "But you know Director Chen. Did you forget that Director Chen met you when you and little Guo went to visit the army last year?" Although Ding Xiang was not there, she heard Yang Huan and Guozi talk about the incident. "You remember that?" Yang Huan looked at Ding Xiang in surprise, but immediately waved her hand casually and said with a smile, "Hey Sister Ding Xiang, don't worry. Not everyone has such a good memory like you. At that time, Director Chen was talking to my brother. How could he remember a small character like me?" "Well, I'll help you reply and see when they arrange the audition." Ding Xiang nodded. "Sister Ding Xiang, do you have drawing sword? Although I've seen a little of it, I've forgotten most of it. Since I'm going to challenge this role, I have to prepare well," Yang Huan said excitedly, rubbing her hands together. "Finish your homework first. I'll find you a book and study the role with you later." Ding Xiang smiled. "Sister Ding Xiang is still the best to me." Yang Huan smiled and hugged Ding Xiang's arm coquettishly. Unaware that Yang Huan was going to the audition behind his back, Yang Yi's attention was now focused on his wife and children, as well as his parents who were about to arrive. Yang Yi did not know the effect of accompanying Shishi to read before going to bed, but the effect was soon apparent. The next night, Yang Yi called Yang Qing to confirm the train number and departure time for them to come to Jiangqing the next day. As soon as he put down his phone, Lan Haokai's call came in. "Little brother Yang, the next time you do something, can you also let me know? Xian Air came back and asked me to read with her. Where am I going to find a book to read with her in the middle of the night?" Lan Haokai complained. It turned out that Shishi went to kindergarten that day and happily told her friends about her father reading with her. No one knew how the little girl described it, but it attracted Lan Xian to come back and pester Lan Haokai to read with her. Although to Lan Xian, reading books might only be 30% of her interest, the first 30% of her interest was a little too much. Lan Longkai was pestered to the point that he had no choice but to ask Yang Yi for a solution. "Come to me and pick 2 books. You can read with Xian Air first," Yang Yi suggested, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "I bought a lot anyway. I won't be able to read so much in such a short time. After reading, we'll exchange." This was a good idea. Lan Haokai came over to pick the books himself not long after. It was a bit difficult for Boss Lan to come out in the middle of winter at night. Actually, he could have sent bodyguards over, but as a parent, he loved his daughter dearly. Bowing one's head willingly to a child was not just a story in history. You're tuning into the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.